Okay. Good evening, everybody. So this is episode 73 of Tech Thursdays. So similar to last week, we're going to be talking about CPUs again. In fact, I just realized that the title of the video has a misspelled number, 99,500X. Yeah, that's definitely wrong. So we'll fix that. Okay. Hey, Matt. Hey, Jinx. Ordering 9950X in about 10 hours. Yeah, actually, to be honest, I wasn't sure I was going to get one, but then I was talking with one of the other people that has been following my channel for a while, and he was telling me, "Are you going to go and get it? Are you going to go and get it?" And I'm like, So, kind of the backstory. Originally, I had planned to get one of the Zen 5 CPUs and then wait for X3D, or at the very least wait for the new motherboards to see if the new motherboards had better overclocking support, specifically on the memory. But I was like, well, so I found out that the new AM5 motherboards will release to market on September 30th. So that's still like a month and a half away from now. So it's still going to be some time to wait for if you're somebody who's waiting for the new motherboards. So X870 and X870E, they're not going to be around for another month and a half. It looks like, I'm just looking at my calendar here. It looks like it's going to be, how many weeks is this? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We're like 6.5 weeks away from the new motherboards. So I was thinking, like, do I really want to wait that long? Because the thing is, the new motherboards, like, if you live near a micro center and you buy a motherboard and you buy a CPU, like, if you bundle them together, so here is the 9950X box. So this is it. If you bundle this with a motherboard, Micro Center will give you $20 off. Sometimes Newegg has similar deals. I'm not familiar with Amazon deals when it comes to bundles. I think they do have bundles, but they're very random. Whereas I think Micro Center has a thing where, yes, they have special bundles, but in addition to their bundles, they also offer the option to pair any motherboard as long as it's the right socket for that CPU. You get $20 off. Sometimes it's $30 off, depending on the motherboard. So that I was kind of waiting to see, like, okay, maybe if I do get the 9950X, I'll bundle it with a new motherboard to test overclocking memory, or at the very least test 4 sticks of memory. But I've already done content like that on this channel before, so I figured, well, you know what, might as well test Zen 5 on the existing motherboards and see how it does, and then later on have somebody else get review samples, and they can show the public if there's better memory support. Although I think a lot of the mainstream tech channels, unfortunately, they don't cover that sort of stuff. Like, I get comments all the time on my videos for DDR5 about, like, 128 gigs of memory, 192 gigs of memory. It's always all about memory. Memory this, memory that. It's a lot of memory. It's not really high-speed memory. It's more about, like, 4 sticks of memory and high capacity. So I am going to test that. In fact, I am going to test that with the 9900X. So I've got both of them at this point. I have the 8-core and the 16-core. So I can test single CCD. I can test dual CCD. Doesn't really matter. Now I have the ability to do all of them. I don't have to wait around for another, 45 days. So the other thing, too, is... So, okay, you guys know how when I went to Micro Center last week to get the 9700X, there was a lot of, like, the salespeople kind of had the idea that a lot of the motherboards would already have the BIOS. So today, when I went in there to get the 9950X, it was a completely different vibe. Like, the salespeople that were there, they weren't actually sure which motherboards had the BIOS, like, from the factory that supports the Zen 5 CPUs. So I don't know what it was. Like, they told me that they have no idea, and I told them that you can check the shipment, like when you got these in, because if the boards came in from May or any time more recent, they most likely have the AGISA code 1170, so they probably will be okay. But they weren't even sure. So it's interesting. They told me that it's a really weird launch, like in the sense that the motherboards aren't launching with the CPUs. They don't really know which motherboards they actually have the BIOS on them. And then, you know what? We've had this discussion on the live stream multiple times now. And it's funny because a lot of the people who watch my channel, they're like, oh, well, everybody should know how to update the BIOS. That is... The sales guy that I was talking to at Micro Center, he said something profound. He said that what is supposed to be is so different from reality, or something similar to that. So basically what he means is, like, you assume that the average PC builder knows how to update the BIOS. The reality is a very, very small percentage of that already small population actually knows how to update the BIOS. Or let alone be comfortable or confident updating the BIOS. So, and that further validates what I was saying for weeks now, that people are going to, like, freak out and avoid upgrading because they're afraid that the motherboard doesn't have the BIOS support. So it is a really, really weird launch. It's a very strange launch. And then on top of that, we're going to talk about the reviews. The reviews of this launch are almost as hilarious as the ones from last week. Although I kind of think these are actually better than last week's reviews. Although it's still kind of a weird mixed bag. I think that most of the people that are reviewing these CPUs that are doing written reviews on their websites, those reviews tend to be better in terms of how thorough they are compared to video reviews. So if you're somebody who only watches video reviews, you're not going to get the full picture. I recommend that you at least read 2 or 3 reviews that are written reviews from long-standing tech publications like AnandTech, Tech Power Up, Tom's Hardware. Definitely check out multiple written reviews, because the written reviews do things in the testing that you don't see in a video format. The only video format that I've seen that gets close to what you would find in a written review is probably like Gamers Nexus. But every other video review doesn't get to the same level of depth that you will find in a written review from these tech sites. So, Gershon, I see you got the 9700X. Yeah, I saw that earlier. Matt's going to stick with the X3D. Yeah, the other interesting thing about X3D. So, as I was walking to the checkout at Micro Center, the sales guy that sold me the 9950X was walking me down to the front, to the register. And I was telling him, I was like, I think there's a lot of people out there that are just going to wait till X3D. And he agreed with me. He was like, yeah, I can totally see that happening, because I feel like AMD's product segmentation in desktop has sort of become 3 different categories. So you have what I call general purpose computing. So what do I mean by general purpose computing? I mean these type of CPUs, the CPUs that have launched today. These are general purpose. So they're not specialized for any certain thing. You can game on them, you can render on them, you can use them as a home server, you can use them in any use case. They would fulfill that purpose and not have any specific weakness or any deficiency. So that's why I consider them like a general purpose desktop processor. Then you have the more specialized parts. So for example, you have X3D. X3D is really starting to become synonymous with gaming desktops. I feel like the X3D, I don't even know if AMD intended for it to be that way, but it certainly seems like X3D is becoming the go-to choice for gamers who want to game on PC instead of a console or on a mobile device, because They're extremely energy efficient. They're the best in class for gaming. They don't heat up your room. They don't turn your room into a sauna. So they don't consume tons of heat. They run relatively cold. So, like that's the reason why I feel like the gaming CPUs, the X3D CPUs are at this point synonymous with gaming CPUs. So, but can you use an X3D for regular things that are non-gaming? Of course you can. Do they do perfectly fine? Yes. You can use them for non-gaming tasks and they work just fine. The only thing is, if you compare an X3D, like the price of an X3D, 7800 X3D versus a 7700X is significantly more. So if you're not going to game, like why are you buying the X3D? Why are you spending more money on the X3D if you're building like a home server? You know what I'm saying? So that's the reason why I feel like the general purpose processors, like these regular non-X3D variants, still fulfill a purpose. Like, because I've seen a lot of comments on these reviews of people saying like, why does AMD even bother making these non-X3D parts? They should just make X3D for everything and only sell X3D. I don't agree with that because I feel like there are drawbacks to X3D. In particular, if you're not gaming, you want higher clocks, you want higher frequency, you want that multi-thread goodness that you get from, and that higher boost that you get on a traditional processor. So it does feel like X3D is more of a specialized part, whereas the non-X3D is the more general purpose processor of how we've ever used processors for the last 20 plus years. So I don't see these standard processors going away. I think they're totally fine. They're lower cost than X3D. So keep in mind that when AMD launches the 9000 series X3D, they're probably going to be more expensive than your run-of-the-mill 9700X, for example. So at least for the first first year that they're out on the market, just like the 7800 X3D, the 7950 X3D, and the 7900 X3D. So it's one of those things where I don't really think anything's wrong. The other thing too, we are going to talk about the reviews in a little bit, but from my own testing, so expect my review of the 9700X real soon. I have completed it. I just need to finalize some things with the video and then get it uploaded and ready to be published to the channel. So I already reviewed the 9700X. The review will go live real soon. And then I just got the 9950X in. So this one's going to take me probably another week or so to do the review. This review will be easier because I'm not going to compare as many CPUs. I don't even know if I'm going to show the lower tier CPUs in the review for the 9950X. So, but yeah, if you're interested in like a general all-rounder PC, the 9700X is pretty good, I would say, based off of my own testing. And I used it as a daily driver for like more than a week. So I feel like I have a pretty good say in how it performs after switching to it like for the whole week, rather than just running benchmarks and then just being like, okay, here are some benchmarks. No, I actually used it as my daily driver the whole time while also doing the benchmarks in my spare time. So it's a pretty good CPU. It's well behaved at stock. It's definitely more well behaved than the 7700X. I will say that. It runs colder. You can turn PBO on. You guys will see it in the review anyway. Are you running reviews? No, I'm running them at stock. I'm running them at the maximum stock. We will look at overclocked RAM in a separate video later on. So I said this in my last live stream. So just so you guys understand my philosophy on how I review things. So just to bring this up. So when I review things, I review them fully stock, out of the box, no extra, no RAM settings, no nothing. So what I will do though, I will set the RAM to run at the maximum supported speed. So for the 9700X, for example, and the 9950X, basically all Zen 5 CPUs will be tested at 5600 megatransfers. This is how I will test the RAM. Well, this is how I've actually tested the RAM, and I plan to do the same thing for the 9950X. So this is the RAM speed that I will test them at for the review. The review will be done at stock maximum supported speed. And this is XMP. I'm using XMP RAM that the XMP profile literally runs at 5600. So, and the reason why we do this is because this is the sort of thing that is guaranteed. This is a guaranteed out of box, like there's no, like if you can't hit 5600 on a Zen 5 CPU, then something is wrong. Either you're doing something wrong or the CPU is defective or the RAM is defective or something's wrong with the motherboard or something like that. It's like a BIOS problem. So that's the reason why I test at spec for a review, because this is what AMD certifies as fully supported, which means if you open a support ticket with AMD or the motherboard manufacturer or the RAM manufacturer, and you tell them that you're running the RAM at this speed, they cannot deny you support because you are running in spec. Now, if somebody tests at like this 6000 or 8000, you can test at these speeds, but the problem with doing this is not a supported configuration. These two speeds are considered overclocked memory, and that is not guaranteed. There's always a caveat. It's like when you watch those drug commercials, you know, those old school drug commercials, they'll tell you how good the drug is, and then they'll have like all these side effects where the voiceover will list off all these side effects, like may cause death and blindness and hearing loss, all this stuff. It'll list all this stuff. That's like that. The fine print on running 6000 or 8000 or whatever in between is going to have all this. There's like a line in there that says like this is not guaranteed. It's considered overclocked. So that's why we don't test at these speeds, even though most people can hit these speeds just fine. But these are more of like an enthusiast thing. And if you're buying a pre-built and you're curious to know how your pre-built from Dell, like your Alienware, how well it's going to run, most likely it's going to be spec'd for this speed out of the box. So I think my reviews are going to show people who buy pre-builds and don't build their own PCs, like what they can actually expect, because this is how it's actually supposed to be configured. So, and then for the 7700X and the 7950X, these are going to be at 5200 megatransfers because that is the maximum speed. And then for the Intel CPUs, for example, the Intel CPUs are going to be at 5600 megatransfers because that is the maximum speed that Intel specs the Raptor Lake CPUs for. So this is how I do my tests. And then for DDR4, all the DDR4 CPUs that I tested are spec'd for 3200 megatransfers. So that is how I test all of them. So that gives you guys an idea on my testing philosophy. And a lot of the better reviewers, a lot of the written reviews that you'll see, they tested the RAM the same way that I'm testing the RAM. I know Computer-Based over in the EU, they test the RAM that way for their reviews. I think there's a number of others that do. I think Anantech also tests RAM that way. I'm not 100% sure on that, though. I forget. So, but yeah, in terms of 8000, we will be doing 8000, but that's going to be in a separate video. That's not going to be in the review. What will be in the review is PBO. PBO can be in the review because PBO is literally just like XMP. You go into the BIOS and you press a button. Whereas XMP is going to depend on the RAM, and we're not reviewing RAM, so that's why we're not going to run above the maximum supported spec. PC Builder shouted me out. Really? And what about what? That's interesting. So in other news, we're going to talk about this in a little bit later. So you guys may have remembered, this is unrelated, but we are going to skip to this later in the stream if we have time. PlayStation VR2 is on PC now, and this is probably the best VR headset on PC. That's a wired headset, not a wireless headset. So it's because it's uncompressed, and you know what's so good about this VR headset? It's OLED. This is an OLED VR headset, and it's super good. It has instantly replaced my old Oculus Rift because it is good. PSVR2 is an awesome headset on PC. So I just wish Sony would have just released, like, remember guys, I said this more than a year ago when the PSVR2 came out. I said, and it's on one of the live streams, I said that if Sony made PSVR2 work on PC, they would literally sell out of them instantly, because they would literally open the floodgates and they would sell way more PSVR2 headsets than locking it down to PS5. And sure enough, they're almost sold out everywhere. Like, it's very hard to find one. I think you can still order them from like Best Buy, but it's very hard to find a PSVR2 headset now. I'll tell you guys what is completely sold out though. The little adapter, the adapter for PC, I can't find. I don't have one of those. Like, I wanted to do a video about the little adapter. I can't order one. They're like nowhere to be found. But that's okay, because you don't actually. It turns out you don't actually need the adapter. If you have a specific graphics card, it will just straight up work. And I already shot the video on how to get it working without the adapter. And I've been using the PSVR2 without the adapter, and it works really, really good without the adapter. And here's the thing, it's extremely easy to set up. The PlayStation VR2 is probably one of the easiest headsets I have ever had to go through the initial setup. It's so easy. All you do is connect the headset to the PC. All you do is connect the controller. You pair your controllers with the Bluetooth on the motherboard. You make sure you have the antenna connected to your Wi-Fi on your motherboard. That is the thing that Rich from Digital Foundry probably did wrong, because Digital Foundry was saying, like, he was saying that he was trying to get it working, and he did the same thing that I did. He connected it straight in and it worked, but his controllers kept disconnecting while he was trying to play Half-Life Alyx. And I was sitting there thinking, like, I bet he does not have his Wi-Fi antenna connected to his motherboard. And sure enough, if you scroll down in the comments of that video, there's like a whole bunch of people saying how they had the same problem until they connected the Wi-Fi antenna to their motherboard. Because the Wi-Fi antenna is also the Bluetooth antenna for the motherboard. So all this talk about, oh, you got to buy a certain Bluetooth adapter, USB, and you got to have the adapter from Sony. You don't actually need any of that stuff. I didn't have to buy anything. All I did was connect the headset to my graphics card, because you have to connect it to your graphics card, and then you pair the controllers with the PC, the Bluetooth, and you install the PlayStation VR app on Steam, and you go through the initial setup just like how you set up Oculus, and you're good to go, and that's it. And it's awesome. It's OLED VR. It's so good. It's so good. So, wow. I was very impressed. Most people do not like their experience on VR. The Valve Index is much harder to set up though. The Valve Index is so much more complicated, the setup process, because you have to have like the base stations and stuff. See, the nice thing about this is just as easy as the Meta VR headset. Like, you literally just pair your controllers with your PC. You literally plug in one cable, and that's it. There's no base station. There's no infrared sensor. There's no cameras. There's nothing. You just set it up, and it's done. It's like so brain dead easy, and the tracking is so much better than like the Oculus Rift S. So I was amazed, man. I was amazed. The only thing that it's lacking is it's missing some of the features that it gets, like. On the PlayStation 5, it has something where it has like foveated rendering, where it tracks your eyes so that the GPU will render more precision toward the areas where you're actually looking, compared to like the areas where your peripheral vision is not focusing on. Whereas I think on PC you don't get that, but that's fine, because it just ends up rendering the whole thing at full resolution the whole time. So. Played for 45 minutes on the Oculus 3 that a friend owns, and it was a lot of fun. Is that the Meta Quest 3? I'm guessing that's the Meta Quest 3. Yeah, right. As far as I'm concerned, there's only like 2 VR headsets right now that are legitimately worth looking into. There's the Meta Quest 3, and then there's the Sony PSVR2. Every other VR headset is dead to me. Like, I don't even bother thinking about them. Because, first of all, a lot of those other VR headsets are stupidly expensive, for one thing, for something that is so niche. And I feel like VR hasn't really, it hasn't really made itself anywhere close to being mainstream. So, yeah, it's just one of those things where until it has like a killer app and most people actually want to get into it, stuff like the Valve Index, the HTC, whatever, and then all the Pimax or whatever those things are, those super high-end VR, those 8K VR headsets, those things are like a joke. They're a meme. I'm not trying to put down anybody who likes those VR headsets. I'm just saying, like, the vast majority of people are not going to spend that much money on a VR headset, especially if they're not going to use it that much. So, as far as I'm concerned, it's either Meta Quest 3 or PlayStation VR 2. And that's basically those are the only games in town, for real. Like, real talk, those are the only ones that actually matter. Like, legit. Anyway. But if you want a wired headset like this, that doesn't have any batteries, and it has the inside-out tracking, just like the Rift S and the Meta, it's like, yeah, this thing is good. And it has built-in the headphone things, but then you can use your own headphones. It's good, man. Anyway, what were we talking about with the PC stuff? PC Builder shouted you out regarding your 96. He even linked it in his. What's 96050? Oh, you mean 9950X? Yeah, we're going to be doing a lot of RAM videos in the next couple of weeks. So we're going to be looking at the 96 gigs of RAM. We're going to be looking at 8,000 megatransfers RAM. We're going to be looking at a lot of 4-stick, like 4-DIMM sort of setups, because that's one of the things that I'm very curious to know if Zen 5 has improved, like, ease of use for high capacity DRAM. Anyway, okay, so let's look at some of these reviews. So the 9950X and the 9900X reviews are out. So the 9950X, it has the same power limit, or it has the same TDP as the 7950X. However, it doesn't get as hot. Like, it runs about 4 to 5 degrees colder than the 7950X, so that is good to see, while it has the same kind of power limit. So, but other than that, all the numbers that I've seen in my few hours of playing around with it are higher than the 7950X. So, like, Cinebench is scoring over 41 to 42,000. In my case, I'm scoring over 42,000. And my single thread is like 2,000. I forget what the number was. It was like 2,000, or it was like 2,200 something. 2,200, like 65 or somewhere around there. If I remember correctly. But yeah, I'll be doing a lot of tests. I gotta retest the 7950X though with the same memory kit. Yeah, no, I believe that the stock out of box is very important, because first of all, not everybody overclocks. Second of all, a lot of people don't even build PCs. They'll just buy a pre-build. And most pre-builds are going to be configured for stock. And why are they going to be configured for stock? Because the company that sells you a pre-build doesn't want to be dealing with people calling in saying that their PC is, like, not responding or not posting something just because the RAM needs to be retrained or whatever. So that's the reason why they're not going to bother with, like, Expo or XMP or any sort of high speed that's outside of spec. Especially if you guys remember with Intel, like with Intel CPUs, the maximum speed for like 2 DIMMs is actually only, I think it was like 4400 megahertz or 4400 megatransfers. Unless you only have a 2 DIMM motherboard, then it's 5600. That is very weird though. I did not even know that, but it was in the documentation. You're disappointed by the fact that the 9950X has better cores that can hold higher frequencies, but while playing games like Hogwarts and Dragon's Dogma, don't see improvement? Yeah, I wonder about that. See, there's one thing, and this review talks about it too, and I think all those reviewers talked about that weird, like, they had to install some new chipset thing. I recommend, if somebody's gonna go and buy this, I recommend not updating your chipset driver. Don't update your chipset driver. Don't even do it. Unless you're like building a brand new PC and you don't really have any choice. But even then you can download an older version and use that. So I have a theory that a lot of the weird, inconsistent boost behavior is due to the fact that the new chipset driver interacts with Windows Scheduler and tries to... It essentially parks cores when a game application is running, just like on a dual CCD X3D CPU. But I don't understand the reasoning. I mean, I understand the reasoning behind that, but it's one of those things where I feel like it's better in theory, but not better in practice. So I am probably not going to install any updated chipset driver. What I can tell you is running the 9950X with my... Okay, literally all I did today was remove my 9700X, install the 9950X, put the thermal paste, put the cooler on it, turn it on, let it come up to Windows, go into Windows, and run Cinebench R23. That's like the first thing I did as soon as I got into Windows, was run Cinebench R23. I did not update chipset drivers. I did not do any of that stuff. In fact, I'm not going to do any of that for the review. I'm just going to review it out of the box with no additional software tweaks at all. Because what's interesting is if you don't update those chipset drivers and you leave the old ones on there, it behaves, the 9950X will behave the same as the previous 7950X, in the sense that none of the cores are going to park, everything's going to be running. So what that means is nothing's going to sleep unless there's literally nothing going on. Like, all the cores are going to be available when a game's running. It doesn't matter if they're on one CCD or the other. The fact is, you're going to get better response time overall. Whereas I think the idea behind the chipset driver was so that it would restrict the game threads to one CCD, so that it would basically emulate the way a single CCD Ryzen CPU, like a 9700X, for example, handles a game. I think that's the idea behind what AMD did. But I personally think that was not necessary. I have to go and look at reviews that actually did both, because I think nobody posted the before and after. I think like Gamers Nexus did 5 days worth of testing with the like pre-patch, and then AMD told them, oh, you got to install these updated chipset drivers. So then they went and did that. Then they had to redo all their results. But I don't think, did they publish their results that they recorded before they did the update? Because I would be curious to see what those results were and how they compared to the after patch update, because I don't think it's necessary for a non-X3D part to have to do that. So I don't plan on doing that. The other thing too is hold on, where is it? It's in this review somewhere. What is this? Yeah, AMD has yet to firmly document why it is using the PPM provisioning 3D Vcache optimizer with non-X3D chips from the Ryzen 9000 series. We've reached out to AMD, and they responded by stating that core parking feature contains critical game processors. Yeah, this is exactly what I just said a few minutes ago. But while this is a technically accurate description of what the PPM driver is doing, it doesn't really answer the question of why multi-CCD chips have been deemed to need this kind of help when the 7950X and the 7900X did not. This is a thing where AMD made a decision to use that so that they could, in theory, get better game performance, but I don't really think it makes that much of a difference. And the reason why is because the Windows scheduler, without this, the Windows scheduler already kind of knows how to prioritize the fastest cores. It can tell which cores are the fastest ones. So it will typically load the game to the faster threads. I find that hilarious that they thought they needed this on a non-X3D part, because Windows is going to prioritize the fastest threads. Now, usually the fastest threads reside on one CCD. So maybe what they're trying to do is facilitate or reduce the margin of error where Windows may actually assign to the slower cores that don't boost as high. But I don't think that really matters, because I think they should just let Windows do its thing, even though Windows is pretty terrible compared to Linux at multi-threading. I don't think this was necessary. Parking 1 reduces cross CCD latency. I think there's some scenarios where it can actually increase CCD latency, depending on how an application behaves. And the other thing, too, is AnandTech looked at that. That's the reason why I'm telling you guys, you gotta read written reviews. The written reviews are actually a lot better than the video reviews. So when AnandTech has their own custom tool, their software that they wrote internally to ping across cores to get the latency numbers. And this might be an error in the way that their application works, because it just so happens that their application is designed to ping a core and then ping across and then ping the next one and then ping the next one, almost like the distributive function in math. So when it has to cross, so basically if we're on core 0 and we ping core 1, we have 19 nanoseconds of latency. Then when we ping core 2, it's basically the second core, because there's the hyperthread. So you get 19 nanoseconds. Well, all of them are about 19 nanoseconds. As you move further away in that same CCD, it gets up to about 23 nanoseconds of latency between cores, at the worst case, in the same CCD. But what's weird is as soon as it has to cross the fabric and go into the second CCD from core 0, like core 16 is 197 nanoseconds of latency using AnandTech's software tool. And that's significantly worse than the 7950X. So what I'm curious to know is if AnandTech reinstalls Windows, does not install AMD's special driver thing, and then does this exact same test, will they see the same latency? I believe they will not see the same latency. In fact, they even say the same thing that I'm saying. So they're saying right here, our current working theory is that this is a side effect of AMD's core parking changes for Ryzen 9000. That cores are being aggressively put to sleep, and as a result, it's taking an extra 100 nanoseconds to wake them up. If that is correct, then our core-to-core latency test is just about the worst case scenario for that strategy, as it's sending data between cores in short bursts rather than running a sustained workload that keeps the cores alive over the long haul. So I believe that the way their software is set up, it pings the core, but then it backs away from the core long enough for the core to go to sleep via the core parking feature, but then it pings it again because it has to ping the hyperthread on that same core. So that's the reason why. And then it wakes it up again, and that's the reason why they're seeing this extra latency. I think it's becoming that. I think it's because of this core parking that they're seeing these weird latency numbers. Otherwise, it wouldn't make sense, because it can't be the fabric. We know it's not the fabric because the fabric is literally the exact same I/O die that's on all the Zen 5 CPUs. Even the old Zen 4 CPUs have the exact same I/O die. So it's definitely not the fabric. It is a behavior with the Windows scheduler. I'm pretty sure Linux would not show this behavior, and I'm fairly certain if they don't install that chipset driver, they will not see these latencies because, yeah, I don't know. But we'll see. I'm going to test without the driver, and we're going to see what my results look like. Although I don't have this software, so I can't really do this test. I'll have to look at a way to try to figure out core latency, core-to-core latency. For written reviews, you want to look at AnandTech. They're one of the OGs. I'm thinking of another one. So if you're into Linux, Pharonics. So what's really weird is these Zen 5 CPUs perform very well in Linux. These are currently the best CPUs for Linux. The Pharonics review, they basically gave them like a really, really good review because these CPUs are insanely good on Linux. And rightfully so, because Linux is also very good in data center. And the Zen 5 architecture it's almost like it was tailor-made for data center, for servers. So like the Epic version of these is going to probably be the lion's share of what AMD actually sells, where AMD actually ends up selling a lot of these CCDs. Hardware Unboxed had the before and after. Parking one reduces across CCD latency. Are you sure about that? Well, I have not watched the Hardware Unboxed video, so I have to actually go back and look. People are not going to... Or what? People are not going to or young to want to mess around with all this. What percent actually overclock people want to plug and play? Yeah, that's why I test out of the box. And that's why we don't even run like the RAM above 5600. Yeah. I don't know. Well, I don't know. I still kind of think like without these drivers, I think it's probably better. We'll see. I have not watched a lot of video reviews though. So I've only actually watched one video review. AMD told them they had to set it up like an X3D. Yeah, I know, and I don't understand why AMD told them to do that. I don't think that was necessary. Average users don't tweak their setups. Only the enthusiasts do it. Yeah, I know, right? Like, but you know what's funny? Like, people are afraid to update the BIOS. That's the most ironic thing about this whole launch is that, and I was talking to the salespeople at Micro Center about that today, and they were like, yeah, it's really weird because historically there's always motherboards to accompany the CPU launch. It's almost like the CPUs are launching a whole month and a half before they're supposed to launch. And then it's like, who's supposed to buy them besides enthusiasts or besides people who are already on Zen 4 and are going to do a drop-in socket upgrade? But realistically, as a lot of these reviews have pointed out, if you're on Zen 4, there isn't really much of a reason to upgrade to Zen 5 as it stands today. Like, there's very little incentive to upgrade to Zen 5 unless you're an enthusiast who wants to play around with the new functionality and benchmark things like AVX 512 and go for world records, because you do gain access to Curve Shaper. You don't really get that on the Zen 4 CPUs. It's not in their microcode. So you are gaining something, but it's almost like I like to draw this comparison. I always think of AMD Ryzen as like the CPU version of NVIDIA GeForce. So think of it like this. AMD Ryzen is kind of like NVIDIA's GeForce in the sense that both of them overclock in the same manner. Like they both boost based off of a power limit and a temperature limit. That's how NVIDIA GPUs work. That's also how AMD Ryzen CPUs work. And a lot of the fun of overclocking is removed from the user experience because the GPU and the Ryzen CPUs basically do it automatically on their own. Whereas AMD Radeon graphics cards are actually a lot more like Intel Core CPUs. So Intel plus Radeon is kind of the common duo in the sense that both of them behave similar. And then GeForce and Ryzen are a lot more similar to each other than you would think. So I always think of it that way. And what's funny, what's ironic when I'm saying this is it just occurred to me, NVIDIA will try to incentivize you to upgrade by offering an exclusive feature that you can't get on the previous generation. So for example, DLSS3 frame gen, you can't do it on 30 series, but you can do it on 40 series. Similarly, AMD is creating that sort of incentive for enthusiasts because Curve Shaper, you can do it on 9000. You can't do it on 7000. It's the same kind of thing. And Curve Shaper is actually pretty good. If you guys have looked at any of the overclocking content from like Scatterbencher, oh man, the Curve Shaper stuff is like very fascinating. That is the sort of stuff, that is one of the reasons why I pulled the trigger on getting a 9950X, because originally I wasn't thinking of getting one of these. I was just going to have the 9700X to play around with and overclock and all that stuff. But I'm like, okay, you know what? I really need to get my hands on a dual CCD so I can see the difference. You heard Zen 2 team worked on it for the release instead of Zen 5? I don't know. I don't know how many teams they have for the CPUs. I think they have like 2 teams for the GPUs though. You've seen Scatterbencher's graph. Yeah, I know, man. That's exactly the reason why I was like, okay, I gotta get one of these to play around with this. Because the other thing too, the other thing I want to say about this, I said this in the unboxing video of the 9700X last week, and I'll say it here again for those that never saw the video. The Ryzen 9000 CPUs, out of the box, they feel like a CPU, the CPU experience from a decade ago. You buy it, it has a certain percentage out of the box, it doesn't take an insane amount of expense in the cooling. Like you can cool it with whatever random air cooler you have, and it just works. And you don't have to invest in liquid cooling. You don't have to invest in an AIO at all. Like you don't even have to use a high-end air cooler if you don't want to on these Ryzen 9000 CPUs. Out of the box, they're very well behaved, just like CPUs from 10 years ago. It feels like a CPU from 10 years ago in the overall user experience out of the box. It's well behaved. The fans aren't loud. They're not like all rammy and speeding up to 100% RPM because it's targeting 95C. These CPUs don't do that. Whereas the Zen 4 CPUs do that. And the Intel CPUs, like Raptor Lake CPUs, they definitely do that. Like Intel's Raptor Lake is so hard to maintain on air. As somebody who uses a Noctua cooler with a 13900K, let me tell you, trying to maintain a 13900K on an air cooler, even if it's a Noctua air cooler, is a very challenging thing to do. Whereas with this, it's easy. It's easy. I don't even have to think about it. I don't have to do anything. I don't have to adjust the fan curve. I can just let it auto, and that's it. Out of the box. It's so easy. So these are the things that I feel like none of the reviewers talk about this sort of thing. Like, and the other thing too that I feel like a lot of people don't seem to touch on in a lot of these reviews on these new CPUs, most people don't upgrade every generation. So I feel like there's way too much emphasis on comparing the 9700X, any of these 9000 series to the previous 7000 series. Yes, there's nothing wrong with doing that. Everyone's going to do that. I'm going to do that. But at the end of the day, most people that are considering upgrading to a CPU like this, they're probably on a DDR4 based PC. They're probably on an AM4 system. They're probably on an old Intel system, like an Intel 9th gen or Intel 10th gen, or heck, maybe even Intel 6th gen, like Skylake, or some old DDR3 Haswell or whatever. You know, so it's like a lot of people are probably coming from a much, much older setup. And for those individuals, going to a Ryzen 9000, that's like a world of difference in terms of how much of a performance uplift they're going to get. And I feel like there's no one ever seems to talk about that. It's like they'll just brush over that at the very end in the conclusion. It's like, yeah, you know, for anybody in an old system, it's good. But they don't really show you like how much better it is. So that's where I think my review is different, because I definitely focus more on generational, like multi-generational uplift. So like, how does Zen 5 compare to Zen 2? How does it compare to Zen 3? Okay, we got Zen 4 in there because everybody else did that. So it's like, yeah, we can see how it compares to Zen 4, but how does it compare to Zen 3? How does it compare to DDR4 systems? How does it compare to older Intel systems? You know, like that is what I think is really the thing that is lost in translation with a lot of these modern reviews. You want to go from a Ryzen 9000 to another. Yeah, see, and that's the thing. Like if I were on AM4 today, I would go to Zen 5. I would completely skip Zen 4. You're still on AM4. I feel like a lot of people are still on AM4. That's the thing. I feel like there's a lot of people that are either on Intel 9th or 10th gen, or they're on some kind of AM4 CPU. Like most people are still on DDR4. Very few people are actually on DDR5. You're waiting for AM5 to be really cheap. I mean, there are a lot of budget options for AM5. Yes, it will. It is a requirement. And actually, that's the reason why those motherboards are delayed. The reason why those motherboards are delayed is because of USB4. We talked about this like 2 or 3 weeks ago. We've already explained the reason for the delay. But let me tell you guys, I guess we'll just type it in here. So for those that are tuning in, I don't have to repeat it too many times. But X870E and X870 are launching on September 30th is the day. They are delayed due to ASM4242 chipset, aka USB4. They are required to have USB4, and the way they achieve USB4 is from this chipset. I encourage you guys to watch my video of the USB4 add-in card that I did, that Asus released last month. Or was it this month? I think it was last month. It was very recent. It was very recent. Check out my video on the Asus USB4 PCIe card. That card is a preview window into an X870 motherboard. So I've already covered that. Like all the USB4 stuff, like how it appears and how it enumerates and shows itself in the device manager, how it shows up in Windows. If you're on Windows 11, how do you verify you're on USB4? What's the speed? All that stuff. I've already covered that in a video recently. So all the content, all the info pertaining to USB4 and ASM4242 is on the channel. Like all of it's there. So you need to go back and watch the video. I will be doing a lot of motherboard videos once those motherboards are out myself. So in fact, we're going to go do a motherboard block diagram one, because somebody requested that I cover the B650S Wi-Fi from MSI. Somebody in my Discord was asking in the tech help section for me to analyze the MSI Pro B650S Wi-Fi. So we will be doing that here later on. Is this all X870? No, it also brings Wi-Fi 7. X870E and X870, basically what they include is ASM 4242. They include dual PROM 21s and Wi-Fi 7. These are the things that it does. However, the second one, we're going to delete that because that is actually not different from the previous ones. So this, that's it. USB4 and Wi-Fi 7. Those are the two major things that it changes. And this one is not confirmed, but better DDR5 speeds. Or I guess I should say better DDR5 traces. Wire traces. This means higher DDR5 speeds and possibly higher speeds with 4 sticks of DDR5. That is the other thing, but this is not really confirmed though. These first two are well known. Like, we've known this for pretty much all year. This is the stuff that's like, this is assumed to be true, but it is not confirmed to be true. I don't know. I don't know if it'll have more layers. Typically, this requires more layers, though. Opinion on upgrading 5600 to 7800 X3D. Then you were going to upgrade 3080 when 50 series comes out. Honestly, you might look into AMD GPUs. So, right now, the CPU upgrade is going to be very good. The GPU, right now, the first question I have is what monitor resolution are you gaming at? Because the only reason to upgrade the GPU would depend on the monitor resolution. Otherwise, there's not really much of a reason. Because 50 series is going to be very expensive. That's why. Okay, it also has 8x PCIe Gen 5 direct to the right. What are we talking about? Wi-Fi 7 will be extremely nice. You already use Wi-Fi 6. I'm pretty happy with that. What is this 8 PCIe Gen 5 lanes direct? PCIe lanes are different from DRAM lanes. They're not interchangeable. You just switched to a 4K QD OLED. Is that the UCDM? I'm guessing the monitor you switched to was the PG32 UCDM. If not that, then it was probably either that Alienware or that MSI. I forget the model numbers on those. 1080p 240. So then, yeah, there's no reason for you to upgrade your monitor. If you're using a 3080 at 1080p, you don't need to upgrade the monitor. It has the 3080 is a 1440p GPU. So even if you go to 1440p, you still don't need to change the GPU. So I already have a video showing the 3080 Ti versus the 4080. And unless you're gaming at 4K, there's no reason to upgrade. So, and we don't really know what the 5080 is going to be. Assuming the 5080 was what you were thinking of upgrading to. There's a lot of random rumors, but I don't know how NVIDIA is going to position any of those products at this point in time. So I don't really think you need to upgrade the GPU. Let's put it this way. So you answered... So in my mind, the logic... If we're talking about this from a programmer standpoint, if resolution is equal to 1080... or 1440, then no GPU upgrade. Else, if resolution is equal to 2160, then 50 series upgrade. This is the logic. This is the logic because you said for GPU less than equal 3080 whatever, like, then okay, well then this is the logic. Okay? So the 3080 is a 1440p graphics card. So the fact that you said you have a 1080p monitor, that automatically will hit the first condition. So no GPU upgrade. That's, I mean, that's basically, it's that simple. You handed down the 4080 to the son's PC. Well, wait, we're talking about a different PC though. But yeah, that's basically the logic behind it. And I mean, I have a whole video from earlier this year showing 4080 Super versus 3080 Ti. And 3080 Ti, yes, 3080 Ti is faster than 3080, but it's not like insanely faster than 3080. So it's like they're close enough, sort of. So, and even in that video, the results were, it's like, this was the logic that I came up with. So, based off of those results. Yeah. The one we're talking about is a 12 gigabyte 3080. But that's besides the point. I mean, that doesn't really, I mean, it does not matter for 1080p. But for 1440p, it sort of matters, but only in some games. So, okay. What do I want to do here? Do we want to talk about the motherboard? Do we want to do a breakdown of the MSI? Let's see. So, let's do a motherboard diagram here, because this one doesn't have one. So, somebody asked me to do an overview breakdown, well, I guess derive the block diagram of this motherboard. Any thoughts on the 7900 XT? The 7900 XT is actually a pretty good GPU. However, the GRE is such good value at its much lower price point that it's hard to recommend a lot of GPUs that are above the $550, $600 price point, because the GRE is offering such good value. So otherwise, for like $700 something, yeah, the 7900 XT is a very good GPU, especially if you're trying to do stuff with DirectML, or you're trying to get into like AI stuff that's not necessarily CUDA based, or if you're on Linux, then the 700 XT is actually an extremely good GPU because of that 20 gigabyte frame buffer. Okay, so let's do this one real quick. Usually with MSI, if it's a super high-end motherboard, MSI will give you the block diagram, but if it's a more budget-oriented board like this, they will not give you the block diagram. So that's kind of annoying that they don't do that. But we can easily derive the block diagram from this. So it says here, so basically what I do is I look at the motherboard first. I determine, like, okay, how many M.2s does it have? 1, 2, and where's the third one? There should be at least 3. Is it on this side? Is it here? No. Oh, is it? No. Wait, does this only have 2 M.2 drives? Wait, this only has 2 M.2 drives. And none of them are Gen 5? Typically, B650 is supposed to include 1 Gen 5 SSD. So this includes neither. What is the price of this motherboard? This motherboard seems like it's very low end. Typically, B650 gives you 3 or 4 M.2 drives, an X4 slot that oftentimes is sharing bandwidth with one of the M.2 drives. How is this only giving us 2 M.2 drives? Well, anyway, let's just keep going. Let's derive this and see why it is the way it is. It has PCI Gen 4 X16, PCI Gen 3 X1 from chipset, and X4 from chipset. Okay, so this is a B650, which means it only has 1 chipset. It is not a dual chipset design. Well, technically, B650 means that it will give you 4 lanes of Gen 5, and the rest of those lanes are Gen 4. So, here, we'll have to write the table down. We can remove this. I don't think we need these. Okay. So, X670E. X670E gives you 24 lanes. 24 lanes of PCIe 5. And then it includes 8 lanes of PCIe 4. And again, all these are CPU lanes. Then it gives you... well, actually, no, that's wrong. 12. Yeah, it's 12. 12 lanes of PCIe 4 via the chipset. And then it also has 8 lanes of PCIe 3, which also share the option for SATA via the chipset. This is the definition of X670E. Just so people know, this is the highest end motherboard. They have this 24 Gen 5 lanes, all directly connected to the CPU. Then it has 12 Gen 4 lanes off the chipset. Then it has 8 Gen 3 lanes off the chipset. So this is how all X670E boards are set up. So then we have X670. X670 gives you 4 lanes of PCIe 5 to the CPU, and then it gives you 20 lanes of PCIe 4 from the CPU, and then it basically has the exact same chipset lanes on that the X670E does, or offers. So this is chipset, and then you have 8 standard lanes of PCIe 3 / SATA off the chipset. So that's PCIe, or that's X670. This is like well understood. It's only for the GPU? No, it's not only for the GPU. You subtract the GPU from the CPU lanes. Basically, you'll see when we start doing the block diagrams that they're not only for the GPU. 24 lanes minus 16. 16 go to the GPU. The remaining 8 go to anything you want. It could be M.2 Gen 5. It could be X4 Gen 5. This is the thing about the AMD chipset that is fascinating, because it allows the motherboard manufacturers to create a lot of interesting different motherboards that are not similar to each other. For example, the MSI Meg Ace, the X670E Ace, gives you an X4 with 4 lanes of Gen 5, open slot. You can use it for whatever you want. Meanwhile, the Aorus Master gives you 2 Gen 5 SSDs directly connected to the CPU for the fastest SSDs on the planet. The Hero from Asus, the Crosshair Hero, does a very similar thing to the Aorus Master. And then you have ASRock's Taichi. The X670E Taichi gives you Thunderbolt, official Thunderbolt, on an AMD motherboard when nobody thought Thunderbolt was supposed to work on AMD. So it allows you to have a lot of freedom. It allows the motherboard manufacturers to have a lot of freedom into how they want to allocate these lanes to create unique motherboards to fulfill different user scenarios. Okay, now let's talk about B650 and B650E. B650E. B650E gives you 24 lanes of PCIe 5 directly to the CPU. And then it gives you 8 lanes of PCI 4.0 from the chipset. And then it also gives you 4 lanes of PCIe 3/SATA off the chipset. So this is B650E. Notice, B650E offers more Gen 5 lanes than an X670. An X670 only offers 4, whereas a B650E offers 24. This is the reason why when you guys see that letter E, which stands for extreme, the E, remember in your mind that the E means 24 lanes of direct CPU PCI Gen 5. That is what it's all about. If it doesn't have the E, it doesn't have those 24 lanes, as is the case with this. Okay, then B650. B650, by definition, 4 lanes of, it's supposed to be 4 lanes of Gen 5 to the CPU. And then what is it going to be? 20 lanes of PCIe 4 to the CPU. And then you have the same lanes. So notice that the chipset lanes are the same for B650, for the 2 B650s, and then the chipset lanes for the X670s are the same. Because the chipset's the same. It doesn't change. What actually changes is the CPU lanes. Okay. Now here comes the interesting thing. So, what does it mean if we're going to start talking about the new chipset, the X870E? So I think now it's pretty clear what the E means. The E means you get a lot of PCI Gen 5. You get a lot of PCI Gen 5. This is the reason why historically the highest end B650E costs more money than a lot of X670 boards. And on top of that, a high-end B650E offers features that you can't get on a regular X670. For example, a B650E, a lot of them can offer the postcode debug. You can't get a postcode debug on an X670. If you want a postcode debug on an X670, you have to get an X670E. Only X670E and B650E offer postcode debugs. You can't get postcode debug on these. It's not offered. So how you can tell if somebody has a more premium motherboard is whether or not they have the E. If they've got an E, they have a pretty good motherboard. It's automatically assumed that it has an overkill VRM, so meaning every single X670E and B650E have super overbuilt VRMs for overclocking. They may or may not have, but a lot of them do have the postcode debug for debugging. And a lot of them have the RGB, all that stuff that the gamers want. They have all that stuff. So what I like to do is I always tend to remember the flagship names. So if you're not familiar with the flagships, this would be another thing to keep in mind. So besides memorizing the fact that E equals 24 lanes of Gen 5 directly connected to the CPU, the other thing to remember is the names of the flagship motherboards. So what is the name of ASUS's flagship Ryzen series motherboard? Let's see if the chat knows. Let's see if you guys know. Because ASUS is the largest brand when it comes to motherboards. I would assume that at least some people in the chat should know the name. Like, this is the highest end ASUS flagship. So, this motherboard is known as the X670E ROG Crosshair Hero. Is there like a Wi-Fi in the name? I think Wi-Fi is also in the name. Wi-Fi. I think the name Wi-Fi is in there. This is Asus's premium, like best-in-class motherboard. This motherboard is better than the ProArt. This motherboard is better than the Strix. This motherboard is better than every other Asus motherboard. This motherboard is superior to all others. Okay, RK did an interesting thing. RK did mention Extreme. Yes, you are correct. There is also the X670E ROG Crosshair Extreme with an E. Extreme. This is a $1,000 motherboard. This is the top of the top. However, this motherboard is EOL. That means it is end of life. Asus no longer manufactures the Extreme. They stopped making that motherboard sometime last year. So right now, the Hero is the only game in town. And you can tell when there's a flagship motherboard. Also, I want to point something out. If you guys look at what the reviewers are using to review the CPUs, it's always going to be one of the 4 flagships, one of the horsemen of the apocalypse. They always use one of the 4 flagships. So this is one of the 4 epic motherboards. The Hero. This is like the first champion. Now we have another one. What is the name of the MSI flagship motherboard? Let's see if you guys know MSI's lineup. I am like so much a product manager right now. This is ridiculous. I can't believe I actually know all these motherboards. Osby says Godlike. Godlike is in the same class as the Extreme. That's the same as the Extreme, so that's not what I'm looking for. Ace. The Meg. X6. I guess it's the X670. Well, MSI Meg. X670E. Ace. This is the flagship motherboard of MSI. The Ace. So this one is equivalent to the Hero. Now, okay, people in the chat were saying Godlike. Godlike is the equivalent to the Extreme. The Crosshair Extreme and the MSI Meg Godlike, those two are like the most high-end, but the reality is not a lot of people buy those motherboards. Those motherboards are more like, think of it like this. If the Asus Crosshair Extreme and the MSI Meg Godlike are like RTX Titans, whereas the Crosshair Hero and the Meg Ace are like RTX 4090s. I hope that makes sense. So think of it that way. So you got the Ace and you got the Hero. What about Gigabyte? What's Gigabyte's flagship motherboard? Yeah, the Extreme is like an RTX Titan. Well, you know what, Dizzy? If you think the price of the Extreme makes you cry, look at the price of the Godlike. The Godlike's even more expensive than the Extreme. Oris Master, you got it. The X670 Oris Master from Gigabyte. So we have the Hero, we have the Ace, and we have the Master. This is the 3rd champion. Or the 3rd horseman. We got 3 out of the 4. So that means there's one more. There's one Extreme. The Extreme from Gigabyte is like the Extreme from Asus and the Godlike from MSI. So we're not talking about those because those are the ones that you can't really buy after the first year because they stopped making those. So now the last one, last but not least, ASRock. What is the ASRock flagship? That's it. The X670E Tai Chi. These are the 4 flagship motherboards. So, meaning, pretty much, every review you see on the Zen 5 CPUs, almost every single one, if not all of them, will be using one of these 4 motherboards. These are the motherboards that you will see people using to review the new Ryzen CPUs. It's one of these 4. You won't see them reviewing on some TUF. You're not going to see them using a Strix. They're not going to be using a Prime or a Carbon Wi-Fi or a Phantom Gaming or a Steel Legend or an Aorus Elite. No, they're going to be using one of these 4. These are the premium flagship motherboards. So, it's interesting because I feel like there's at least one person watching the chat that has like one of these 4 motherboards. There might be more than one person. Somebody in the chat already has the Ace. Someone in the chat already has the Crosshair. I am currently using the Master. We are streaming live using an X670E Aorus Master from Gigabyte. So the only one I don't know if anybody watching has a Tai Chi, but I know like at least these 3 are accounted for on this stream right now. So the Tai Chi is the only one that I don't know if anybody's got that one. But what's interesting about this one, so see the thing is they all offer like lots of interesting things that you can't get on the others. So like what does this have? What is the Hero's defining feature? USB 4. The Crosshair Hero has USB 4. So forget about waiting for X870E. If you have a Crosshair Hero, you already have USB 4. You've had USB for someone who owns a Crosshair Hero, USB 4 is so 2022 because you've had USB 4 for about 2 years now. Even if you didn't even know it. So, like, you literally are walking around with a motherboard that has USB 4. Even despite all this hype about, like, USB 4 this, it's 2024, USB 4 is here, boys. No, well, guess what? If you have a Hero, you already had it for, like, 2 years. What about the Ace? What does the Ace offer that you can't get on any run-of-the-mill motherboard? This gives you PCIe 5.0 X4. It gives you an extra PCIe Gen 5 slot that gives you full PCIe bandwidth. No other motherboard offers this. No other motherboard offers that. What do I mean by that? What do I mean by that? Here's the Ace. What I'm talking about is the bottom slot. The very last PCIe slot. All the way down there at the bottom of the motherboard is full PCIe Gen 5. You know what that means? That means that this motherboard has so many retimers and intricately woven layers to get those wire traces to provide PCIe Gen 5 signal integrity all the way down to the bottom of the motherboard. That is the reason why this motherboard is expensive. Because it has the layout to give you PCIe Gen 5 on every single slot. So, that's the cool thing about the Ace. PCIe Gen 5, fully independent PCIe Gen 5 of the graphics card in that bottom slot. So, that's its claim to fame. And then the master. The master gives you, it gives you lots of Gen 5, lots of NVMe Gen 5, while also optional USB 4. Optional USB 4. So the master, where the others give you like exclusive things, let me see, 2X NVMe Gen 5. Like with no sharing. What I mean by that is no sharing. But it gives you the option. So the cool thing about the Aorus Master is it gives you the flexibility. It gives you flexibility. It doesn't shoehorn you into one thing or the other. It lets you decide based off of your use case. And the other thing too is the Ace. The Ace also gives you 10 gigabit LAN. The Hero does not, although the Extreme Crosshair does. The Gigabyte also has optional 10 gig. So this is optional 10 gig. Without like using 4 lanes. Without dedicating 4 lanes. So the thing about the Master is it's very versatile, but it doesn't give you any, it doesn't restrict you into any specific fixed configuration that you may or may not even use. So that's the cool thing about the Master. The Master does have a clear CMOS button. It's just not on the back. It's on the motherboard. It's toward the bottom of the motherboard. But it does have a clear CMOS button. So the only thing about the Master is if you want to clear the CMOS via the button, you have to open up the case and press the button on the motherboard. It's not on the back of the motherboard. Okay, and then Tai Chi. Tai Chi offers Thunderbolt, like straight up Thunderbolt 4. Like, okay, technically speaking, you can use Thunderbolt devices with USB 4 because it's backwards compatible. However, it's not 100% guaranteed in terms of support. Whereas ASRock literally gives you Thunderbolt 4. Like, it is full Thunderbolt 4 certified. Whereas the Crosshair Hero and the optional USB 4 add-in card for the Master, these are not like certified to work with Thunderbolt, even though they're using Intel's chipset. Whereas this, on ASRock, the Tai Chi literally has an Intel validated, Intel literally signed off on it and basically said, ASRock, we know it's an AMD motherboard, however, we blessed it. We are Intel and we bless this AMD motherboard. As weird as that sounds, that is an official thing. So you have legit Thunderbolt 4, which is an Intel invented technology, traditionally for Apple, or originally for Apple, but now it's on Windows, and ASRock has it validated to work on an AMD system. So that's one of the cool things that the Tai Chi offers. So that's kind of what it has. So they all have something that's unique. I guess the Hero has that add-in card as well, for an extra M.2. So there are some other things too, but I think these are kind of the main qualities that make the flagships the flagships. This is what justifies them as the flagship motherboards. The Asus ROG Strix B650E-E. Yeah, the B650E-E is one of the best B650E motherboards. It's a really good one. Although there are newer, better ones that are supposedly coming out that were announced at Computex a few months ago. Yeah, Tai Chi Lite is... Yeah, Tai Chi Lite is on a whole nother level. That's one that I was referring to. But the other one that's really good is the Gigabyte B650E USB4. That's another one that's really good. So these are the flagships, and these are their defining qualities. And keep in mind, guys, this is in addition to the already overkill VRMs that all of them have. So people are like, well, what about VRMs? Well, the thing is, the flagship motherboards already have like the best VRMs. So it's like you don't even need to bother thinking about the VRMs because they're all like overkill VRMs. So I don't even bother looking at the VRM because it's already understood that they're very good. As well as the fact that AMD CPUs don't even pull that much power. So it's like, okay. It's like VRM, check. We have that already. Move on. Will X870E come with the standard USB 4 or can they deploy the USB 4 version 2 yet? It is the version 2. It's a different chipset from these. It's a newer one. You will only go X870, but yeah, you have to see the line. Okay, so I want to say one thing about X870. So X870, I'll give you guys an easy formula to remember. X870E equals X670E with USB 4. Okay? This is the easiest way to memorize what X870E is. X870 equals X670E with USB 4. X870 equals... Now, this is the one that's interesting. This is the trick question. So, what is this one? What is X870? X870 equals... So, I'll give you guys a hint. X870 is equal to one of these four. But it includes USB 4. So, it is something with USB 4. Okay, so Max is saying B650E. STS is saying B650. Caveman's saying it's a Taichi. But, okay, you said Taichi, but the thing is there's two Taichis. There's an X670E Taichi, and there's a B650E Taichi. Same as X670E. Okay, so the correct answer... Max is correct. B650E. X870 equals B650E with mandatory USB 4. See, this is why I said it was a trick question. Because at first glance, people are going to be like, oh, it's got to be X670 with... No, it's actually B650E. So that means something specific about this. Because remember what I said earlier? Remember what I said that the E historically is the better, the higher end offering. So X670E is like the elite version of X670. And likewise, B650E is the elite version of B650. And the reality is a lot of B650E motherboards were actually somewhat better than the X670 boards. And the main reason why is because they had that full 24 lanes of Gen 5, whereas X670 only had 4 lanes of Gen 5. Now, the total lane count is still 24 CPU lanes. It's just 20 of them only run at Gen 4 on an X670. So what's happening is there's some consolidation going on. AMD is basically eliminating the X670 product offering for the Zen 5 CPUs. They're opting to continue this in the form of an upgrade to X870E, and then they're going to upgrade the B650E and kind of rebrand it. I don't want to say rebrand because they are offering USB 4, so it's not exactly a rebrand, but X870 is basically B650E with USB 4. So it's one of those things where I feel like it's a marketing thing more than anything else, because I feel like AMD wants the majority of the enthusiast space to be on the X class chipset from a product positioning standpoint. So they're going to go ahead and call B650E X870. That's essentially what they're doing. So keep in mind, this one's going away. X670 is going to go EOL later this year, probably around November, December. It's probably going to go EOL, and you're not going to be able to find X670 motherboards next year because they're being replaced. They're just not being replaced. I mean, B650E is going to be replaced with X870. X670E is going to be replaced by X870E. So I guess B650 will continue to exist. I'm not 100% sure what they're going to do with the B650 boards. They could potentially continue to exist because they're basically X670, except it's one chipset instead of two chipsets. That's basically all it is. Should people expect a rise in price? I don't think the prices should be that much more. However, keep in mind that at launch, they should be more expensive than X670E, but not by a whole lot. The main extra cost is going to be USB4. Basically, you're going to have to pay for the added inclusion of ASM4242. ASM4242 is the newer USB4 chipset. So this is going to be soldered on to these X870 boards. So that's going to be an additional charge that I'm pretty sure the motherboard manufacturer is going to pass off to the consumer. So at launch, I expect them to be either the exact same price as X670E and B650E typically was priced at, if not slightly more. But in the current market where things are, I feel like we're in the PC market right now is not as in demand as it was 2 years ago. So because of that, I don't think these X870 motherboards should be significantly more expensive. I think they're going to be priced similar to X670E when it was new. Just know that you're having to pay for this, and you're also having to pay for Wi-Fi 7. The newer Wi-Fi 7, although I don't really think the Wi-Fi 7 is going to increase the price in any significant way. So, but yeah, this is the thing that is going to make those motherboards more expensive. And then we can kind of look at a motherboard that already has this. So, Gigabyte has announced a motherboard during Computex called the this is a weird name, B650E Aorus Pro X USB4. So look at what this is. This is a B650E with USB4. So this is actually an X870 motherboard in disguise. Or maybe X870 is B650E plus USB4 in disguise. But this is basically low-key X870 just sitting there. And it has USB4. So I wouldn't be surprised if Gigabyte rebrands this later this year or next year as the X870 Aorus Pro X. And they can remove the B650E and the USB4 from the name. So they already have a motherboard. And the other thing, too, is if we look at the block diagram. So check this out. Right there. Check it out. As media USB 4 controller. This. So the cool thing about Gigabyte's diagram is it shows you where they physically soldered the chip. So the ASM4242 is that square on the motherboard. They literally soldered it on the motherboard. So that's how you're getting that USB 4. And I think this is the reason for the delay in the X870 boards, because they're trying to ramp up volume of motherboards that include ASM4242, and that's why it's delayed. That's the only explanation I have that makes sense as to why these are delayed. What's really weird about this motherboard, though, which I think is actually really cool, not only does it give you USB 4, it also includes a Thunderbolt USB 4 header. which means not only does it support ASM4242, the newer USB4 version 2, it also has the support for the legacy Intel-based USB 4/Thunderbolt 4 on the add-in card that you plug in to this second PCIe slot. That is hilarious. That means you can literally run 4 40 gigabit USB-C ports off this motherboard. Thanks for the sub. But yeah, like this motherboard is another one of those that I don't know why it's... I don't know if Gigabyte had already planned for this name before the X870 was announced or what, because I think they should just call this an X870 Aorus Pro X, because that's basically what it is. And the other thing too, right here, you can see ASM USB 4 controller connects directly into the CPU, which means that they are using 4 of the Gen 5 lanes for this controller. I feel that's a waste. I wish they would have put this down here or something on the chipset, but it is what it is. They're basically doing what the ASRock Tai Chi does. So that's a decent motherboard though. Yeah, oh, this thing does have the postcode debug. Yeah, see? It has the postcode debug to the right of the RAM. So this one's got the postcode. This is a B650. This is an X870 board with a postcode debug. You can see it right there. So that's nice to see. This is probably going to be a $350 motherboard, if I had to guess. I would guess about $300 to $350 for this motherboard. Especially because it has the postcode. Historically, if you wanted a postcode debug, the lowest you could go in terms of price was around $350 on a B650E. Otherwise, you were paying, you know, $450 to $500 for an X670E that included the postcode. You feel more comfortable with the... Yeah, I totally like the postcode. I don't like the LEDs that don't tell you anything. Yeah. No, I told myself if I get a new motherboard, it's mandatory. For me, the postcode is like mandatory. I'm not buying another motherboard that doesn't have this, especially because I do a lot of DDR5 overclocking. So a lot of the time when you're overclocking DDR5, or if you're testing 4 sticks of DDR5, you're literally sitting there watching the memory train. And it can take several minutes if you're running a lot of RAM, especially like 192 gigabytes of RAM. So without a postcode, it is a nightmare just sitting there with your fingers crossed, hoping that it's going to train and come up and post and get to Windows. So, but this thing helps a lot in telling you what's going on. So, yeah. That's like mandatory equipment as far as I'm concerned on a motherboard. Yeah, so what I will say, Max, is you're probably going to be looking at X870. Well, okay, here's the thing. X870 is basically B650E. So that basically means you're going to be looking at the more premium motherboards. Because historically speaking, postcode debugs, I think I said this a few minutes ago, and I feel like I'm repeating myself, but postcode debugs were only featured on X670E and B650E. You couldn't get... There are no X670 boards that have a postcode, and there are no B650 boards that have a postcode. They're only featured on the E, the extreme motherboards. So you're basically, like, it's down to those two families. But I guess the bright side is, you know for a fact you're getting the full Gen 5 lane count. So it's like, you know, it's not all bad, but it's going to be pricey. I mean, the other thing too is people who just, like, have money to burn And if they watch this live stream, they're probably like, okay, I just need to get one of these. Because all the flagship boards have the postcode debug. Like, that's standard equipment on every single flagship board. So you don't even have to worry about that. It's like all of them have it. So otherwise they wouldn't. How would you consider them a flagship if they were missing like a postcode debug? That's kind of ridiculous. Yeah. The Asus and the MSI boards do that. I don't know if Gigabyte has that option. I think it does, but I never turn it on. Yeah. So those are going to be interesting when they come out. So here's my take on these motherboards, the launch of the motherboards. Anybody who is waiting for X3D, for like Zen 5 X3D, I have a feeling they're going to have a much smoother time upgrading compared to somebody who is buying into Zen 5 today. Because if you're buying into Zen 5 today, you're pretty much having to buy a motherboard that was meant to go with last gen Zen 4. Think of it like this. It's almost like if someone was buying a 13900, to use Intel as an example, pairing up a 9950X is with any of these older motherboards. Any of these motherboards. That's like if somebody bought a 13900K or a 14900K and they paired it up with a Z690 motherboard. That's what that would feel like. You're taking a flagship Intel CPU, in this case a Raptor Lake CPU, and you're pairing it up with a motherboard that was designed for 12th gen Alder Lake. That is what it feels like to buy Zen 5 now and pair it up with the motherboard that was designed to go with Zen 4. Will it work? Of course it will work. Is it ideal? That remains to be seen because we don't know what improvements AMD made under the hood with the newer motherboards. Just like how Intel improved the memory speed capability with Z790 versus Z690, there could be potential improvements with X870 and X870E that we are not even aware of yet. So that's one thing I'll say on that. What are we talking about? With the EPS connector? Okay, that's why you went with a 7800 X3D. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's not like it's terrible. It's just a weird feeling. That's why when I was talking with the salespeople at Micro Center, they also felt like it was kind of a weird launch to them. Because think about it. If you're a salesperson that has been at Micro Center for a couple of years and you've seen your share of product launches, CPU launches, GPU launches, whatever. You've seen it all at this point. And it's like, okay, now we're going to launch new CPUs, but for some reason, we don't have any new motherboards. Like, how does that work? It's just kind of a weird launch. Because it's like, why? It's like, okay, I got all these CPUs. What am I supposed to use them with? Like, okay, we're supposed to use them with last-gen motherboards. We're supposed to sell people on last-gen motherboards and then remind them to update the BIOS. Like, that's kind of a weird sell. You know what I'm saying? So I don't know why it was intended. I guess my only assumption here is it all stems from ASM 4242. I'm not trying to throw as media under the bus, but I can't think of any other significant reason other than ramping up volume of these newer motherboards. And for some reason, they were delayed due to some thing with supply chain related issues, which is probably USB 4 because AMD mandated USB 4 and Intel was like, man, not again. No, go away. We have to do our microcode fix. We're not giving you Thunderbolt controllers again, like last time. So it's like, okay, we have to wait on ASMedia to do their thing. And I kind of think that is what the reason is, guys. Like, I don't think it's microcode. I don't think it's like some Windows scheduler thing. Like the Windows scheduler thing, that's Microsoft and AMD need to figure that out. But as far as from a fundamental hardware level, it's gotta be some sort of supply chain thing. And the only thing that I can think of that could hold this process up is this. And the reason why I really think it's ASMedia's fault is because, here, let me show you something. Asus USB4 PCI Gen 4 card. Where is that thing? If RK's watching this, he's gonna like bust out laughing because I waited an entire year for, well, not a year, but I waited a really, really long time for this thing. And where is it? Come on, Asus. Where's your stupid news article? Asus Edge Up. Come on, where is it? Okay, here it is. Okay, look, check this out, guys. Check this out. This is the reason why I think I know what the reason is. The reason must be ASM4242, and here's why. So check this out. USB 4 PCIe Gen 4 card upgrades your desktop PC with dual USB 4 ports. Look at when this article was written. January 17th of this year. Do you know when this was first talked about? CES. Literally like the first full week or the second full week of this year was when this was announced. I opened up a support ticket with Asus asking them, where is this thing? Take my money. Where is this thing? And they're like, I'm sorry, we can't, unfortunately, we can't comment on unreleased products. And I'm like, can you at least give me a window? Is it Q1? Is it Q2? Please don't be Q3. Well, guess what core it was? It was Q3. Little did I know that I would be waiting for more than half a year to get my hands on this. This is it. The USB 4 PCIe Gen 4 card. There's a video on the channel recently from this month. I think it was this month. It's pretty sure it was this month. Maybe it was the very end of July. Either way, there's a recent video on my channel detailing how to set this thing up, how to get 40 gigabit working, how to play PlayStation 5 games using external Thunderbolt on AMD with this thing in Threadripper. So basically all that good stuff. So Thunderbolt this, Thunderbolt that, and then it's like, okay, guess what? AM5 supposed to get the requisite header. Intel 700 series is supposed to get the requisite header. And then the Pro workstation, that's basically my Threadripper motherboard. Because I wanted to add this to my Threadripper system literally since the beginning, since CES. I waited like 6 or 7 months and it finally showed up. And the thing is, you can't even get one in America. If you live in America, I don't know if you can even get this. Like, okay, it's on Amazon, but it's like way, way overpriced on Amazon. Like, you have to basically import this from Japan if you want this now. So, and that's literally what I had to do to get. I had to get this from Japan. This came to me from Japan. My box has Japanese instructions on how to use it. So anyway, I had to get it from Japan because it's like I waited like 7 months. I don't know what's going on with North America and the supply chain of ASM 4242. But basically, this is using ASM 42. Do they say it in this article? I don't think they're gonna. Okay, anyway, 40 gigabit. 40 gigabit. That's dual 40 gigabit. So that's 80 gigabit on the PCIe backplane. So the difference between this and the old Thunderbolt add-in card, This thing is PCIe Gen 4. The older Thunderbolt card from Intel is PCIe Gen 3. That is the difference. So you get your full DisplayPort alt mode, you get DisplayPort input. Just go watch the video if you guys are curious about how to add USB 4 to your system. The video covers it. Now, the only thing is it's an ASUS card, which basically means it's only going to work on an ASUS motherboard because it's ASUS and they want you to buy ASUS. They don't want you to buy everybody else, so I totally understand that. That's fine, whatever. If we go here, I think it says ASM. Where is the ASM thing? Do they not mention as media? I know they mention them somewhere. I don't know where, but they're supposed to mention them. Okay, this is whatever. Support? No? Driver? No. User's manual? Does it mention ASM? There it is, boys. This is what I was looking for. As media USB 4 ASM 4242. So clearly, the thing is, it took so long to get this card. The fact that I had to order this thing from Japan to get to me in time so I can make that video, and now we're finding out that the X870 motherboards, that all of them literally have this thing soldered onto them from the factory, are only coming out at the end of September. Everything points to it being a supply chain issue, a delayed issue with ASM 4242. Because why announce this product in January and not be able to sell it until now? Unless there's a supply chain issue. Context clues. It just makes sense. Like, that's the natural answer. So, the Hero uses the Intel controller. Correct. And the reason why is because this didn't exist 2 years ago. This was supposed to come out 2 years ago. So the story goes that originally, motherboards for AM5 that were going to offer, meaning X670E and some B650E that were going to offer USB 4, were supposed to use this chipset, this chip from ASMedia. However, ASMedia was like, there's a global pandemic. I'm sorry, everybody's working from home. There's a delay. Nothing's wrong. Give us like 6 months. Yeah, we have nothing further to say on the issue. So you know what they had to do? Basically, AMD and all the AIBs were like, oh man, ASM's like, ASMedia's letting us down. What are we going to do? Oh, I got an idea. Let's call up Intel. And AMD's like, that's going to be awkward. We got to call up Intel to put USB 4. And so they did it anyway. And Intel's like, eye roll. Like, really? Really? You want us to give you Thunderbolt controllers so that you can sell your motherboards and compete directly against us? Okay, fine. That's basically what happened, guys. That's basically what happened. That's why the Crosshair Hero, the ASRock Taichi, all the Gigabyte boards that have the add-in card, all the ASRock boards that have the add-in card, all the Strix boards, and the ProArt, and all that stuff, that's why they work with the Intel Thunderbolt chipset. However, Intel was like, hold up, guys, hold up. We at Intel will sell you Thunderbolt chipsets for your AMD motherboards, provided you cannot say Thunderbolt. That's like saying a bad word. That's like in Harry Potter saying the name of he who will not be named. So you cannot say Thunderbolt if you're talking about AMD. That was the one condition that Intel had for all these motherboards. That is the reason why it is politically incorrect to say the Crosshair Hero from Asus has Thunderbolt, even though it actually does. It is politically incorrect to say that. So to be politically correct, you have to say the Crosshair Hero has USB 4, even though it features Intel JHL 8540. In fact, Intel JHL 8540, if we go right here, check this out, Intel JHL 8540 Thunderbolt 4 controller. Now, let's take a look at something here. X670E Crosshair Hero. Crosshair Hero tech specs. Let's take a look. Oh wait, did they mask it? They got rid of the words because it's politically incorrect. Hold on, I thought they. Oh look, guys. Wait, oh look, I found it. We found the glue. 2 USB 4 ports with Intel JHL 8540 USB 4. Intel JHL 8540. Intel JHL 8540 Thunderbolt 4 controller on Intel.com. On an AMD product. On an AMD Ryzen motherboard. It's like if somebody shouts that, the world explodes. Thunderbolt 4 on an AMD product. Oh, what is the world coming to? There you go. X670 X670E Hero with Intel JHL 8540 PCI Gen 3. But that's being replaced by ASM 4242. So that's the reason why that's the reason why they're making a big deal about this USB 4 nonsense. As far as I'm concerned, it's a bunch of nonsense. The fact that I had to wait like half a year for Asus to get their USB 4 thing because of ASM 4242. Like, really? I had to wait 7 months for an ASM 4242 for my Threadripper system? There you go. That's why we gotta wait for those AMD motherboards. Thank you, ASMedia. Thanks, Intel, for providing the JHL 8540. Thanks, Intel. You have Intel Ethernet controller on the AMD motherboard? Yeah, I know, right? Like, so do I. So do I. The Aorus Master, not the Aorus Elite, but the Aorus Master has Intel LAN. Yeah. Aorus Master has Intel LAN. Specification... LAN, Intel 2.5 gigabit LAN. and Intel Wi-Fi 6E. My AMD motherboard has Intel 2.5 gig LAN and Intel Wi-Fi 6E. Well, this is funny. You know why I find this amusing? Because Intel tries to bundle their Wi-Fi and their LAN as a package deal when motherboard manufacturers are building their motherboards. So, for example, Intel can offer, like Asus or whoever, or MSI, whatever, doesn't matter, any of them. It'll be like, hey, I'll sell you the Z790 chipsets for your motherboards. Oh, and by the way, we'll give you a volume bundle discount on our Wi-Fi 6E AX210 and our 2.5 gig LAN. Wait, why does this have AMD Wi-Fi on it as well? Oh, that's a different revision. Oh, that's interesting. Okay, well, anyway. So they're like, hey, we'll give you this and this at like an extra 20% off discount if you buy, like 40,000 Z790 chips or whatever. It's like the more you get, the more you buy, the more you save. The more you buy, the more you save. NVIDIA's not the only company that operates on that principle. Like everybody does this, guys. Like every business does this. Like if you buy an extra volume tier, we're going to give you an extra couple of discount points, and we're going to throw in some extra incentive. In this case, Intel's going to throw in a bunch of LAN chips, you know, and that's how they do it. So I find it amusing when, like, AMD is, like, getting into Wi-Fi and stuff, too, now, and it's like, hey, Gigabyte, we'll offer you, and Gigabyte's, we're just going to buy some Intel ones. It's like, okay. The next thing you know, there's going to be like an Intel motherboard with like an AMD Wi-Fi on it. What's the difference between Intel and Realtek Ethernet control? The drivers. Intel makes the drivers for theirs, and Realtek makes the drivers for theirs. But you know there's a new game in town, right? You know AMD makes Wi-Fi 2 now, partnering with MediaTek. So you can actually get a motherboard that has AMD official Wi-Fi in it. But the AMD ones are only Wi-Fi 6E or Wi-Fi 7. Realtek is less likely to cache 22U when you fresh install. Yeah, the weird thing is I don't see that many Realtek these days. It's mostly Intel or AMD MediaTek. So what's interesting about this, I didn't even know this was a thing, guys. Like, I was under the impression that the Aorus Master only had one revision. I thought it was only like revision 1.0. But apparently, there's a newer one. Revision 1.1, so if you buy an Aorus Master and it's 1.1, that means it comes with AMD Wi-Fi. Mine is a 1.0 because I bought mine on launch day in September of 2022 and paired it up day one with a 7950X. So mine has Intel. What's interesting is the LAN is always Intel. Like, it doesn't matter. Only the Wi-Fi is different on this board based off of the newer revision. So what I'll tell you guys is RZ616, this Wi-Fi / Bluetooth is insanely good. Like, a lot of the people that were having problems getting the PSVR2 working were using some different kind of Bluetooth adapter that they had, that they typically used for their mouse or their headphones or whatever. Like, I have not tested the PlayStation VR2 with my Intel Bluetooth. I've only tested it with my AMD Bluetooth on a different motherboard, on a Aorus Elite with the 9700X. And what I can tell you is this, the signal strength on this is so good for the VR, for the controller tracking. Like, it's insanely good. So I'm going to test the AX210 or the Bluetooth on the Intel one soon, because eventually I'm going to try it on different computers. But right now, look, the Bluetooth, it's not version this in the newer version. Yeah, I don't know what the difference between 5.2 and 5.3 is. That is something. But the thing is, most devices today are like Bluetooth 4.0. So 5.2, 5.3, I don't actually know what the differences are, but they're both under the 5.0 or the 5.x family. But yeah, that's a good catch though, yeah. So the Intel, this AX210 is certified for up to Bluetooth 5.3. The AMD one, the RZ616 from MediaTek, is certified for Bluetooth 5.2. I don't know if that's like a software thing, and that's how you determine whether or not it supports a newer revision or not. But yeah, I don't know what that is. You think it's just audio codecs? Yeah, I guess. I don't know. As long as the Bluetooth is like 4.x, it should be fine for the VR headset. And this applies for most VR controllers, not just PlayStation. So I don't really know what 5.x adds over 4.x. It might be the Bluetooth low energy spec, but I kind of think that was like a 4.x thing. But that escapes me right now. I don't really remember. But yeah, that's anyway, we were supposed to do the block diagram for this motherboard because one of the channel members had requested it. So let's do this real quick. This one won't take that long because it's only one chipset and it's missing a bunch of things actually. So I don't think it's sharing anything. So yeah, this one's got the AMD MediaTek Wi-Fi in it. Oh, and it has a Realtek LAN instead of an Intel LAN. That's interesting. So this motherboard from MSI, it says here it has two PCI X16, one Gen 4 X16 from CPU, one Gen 3 X1. Okay, so that means if we are to draw this, I gotta delete all this stuff. I'll probably just delete the Flagship. Let's get rid of those. We'll just leave that stuff there. So you have your socket, you have the CPU lanes, you have the chipset connection, you have the chipset, and then you have the Gen 4, you have the Gen 3, and then you have DRAM over here. You got dual channel, DDR5. So you have DDR5, and then that's going to be A1, A2, B1, B2. And then this is PCIe 5 with only 4 lanes. X4. And we have an NVMe. So we have an M.2. Actually, hold on a second. I don't even think it has PCI Gen 5. I think that said it was all Gen 4. Yeah, so that means this motherboard technically is not even following AMD spec. Because the minimum spec, by definition, B650, is supposed to include 4 lanes of Gen 5. That's why I kept the definition up here. By definition, B650 has 4 lanes of Gen 5 and 20 lanes of Gen 4. But it looks like either this motherboard is not connecting anything. So this is literally... This is PCIe 4.0. Okay, it's 4.0. How many lanes total is that? 16 plus 4 plus 4. Okay, so that's literally 24 lanes of Gen 4. That means that there's literally no Gen 5 on this motherboard. This has got to be a lower cost. This is definitely like a budget B650. So this has, first of all, when I see a motherboard like this has to be at least under $200. This cannot be a $200 motherboard because it doesn't even have any, it doesn't even meet the minimum spec to be called a B650 board. So yeah, I don't know how this is designed the way it is. Yeah, that's weird. Anyway, okay, so it doesn't have any Gen 5 at all. Which basically means it's almost like a last gen motherboard. Except it has DDR5. So, okay, so we have all 24 CPU lanes are accounted for though. Even though they're only Gen 4. So that means we have 24 lanes. We have a total of X24 lanes. of CPU connected PCI 4. So you have 16. You have the X16 slot. You have the first M.2 and you have the other M.2. So I guess one of the good things is you have two M.2 that are directly connected to the CPU. That's good, I guess, but they're Gen 4, so you can't actually use anything with Gen 5 on this. And then down here, this should have 4.0 X8. And this should be PCIe 3.0 X4. So let's see if they actually use... So I guess it's not really meeting the definition, but it's not... It's giving you all the lanes. It's maxing all the CPU lanes. It's just not giving PCIe 5 speed at all. So now let's see if it actually has all of these lanes. So we have 8 lanes on the chipset. So let's see. Let's count the Gen 4. 4. So there's an open X4. So that's half of the lanes. That leaves 4 more lanes. And they literally don't use them. This is a very bizarre motherboard. Okay, this is this is not a good motherboard. So they give you an X4. There's an X4 slot, an open slot with 4 lanes of PCIe Gen 4. So this is perfect for 10 gig LAN. This is perfect for a capture card for, you know, PS5 or Xbox Series X, 4K 60. That's going to work on there just fine. For an internal capture card, like an Elgato 4K Mark II or an AverMedia Live Gamer 4K. But the problem with this board is there's literally 4 lanes blank, like unused resources. So you're literally wasting money because they literally left 4 lanes hanging. Literally nothing is connected to 4 of those PCI 4 lanes. They could have given you a third M.2 drive, but it's like, okay, we're just gonna leave them disconnected. Unused resources. That's always good. Actually, let me go back and look here again. Okay. So, I need to count the Gen 3. So here's 1 lane of Gen 3. The Wi-Fi is another lane. Where's the Wi-Fi? The LAN is another lane. That's 1, 2, that's 2, 3. So that's 3 Gen 3 lanes out of 4. And then where's the SATA? I think it... Okay, 4... Oh, okay. So they're... Oh, I see what they did. Okay, I see what they did. That's weird. That's suboptimal, but it works. Okay, so they did not... It's not that they're unused, so I figured out what they did. Okay, so what they did is every single Gen 4 or Gen 3 lane, they connected to a SATA port. SATA 1, 2, 3, 4. So all the SATA is using up all the PCIe 3.0 bandwidth. So all of these are accounted for. So all those are good, all those are good. So that leaves those remaining Gen 4 lanes. So one of them is a X1. However, it's downclocked. PCI 3.0. Which means they're cutting costs. So instead of driving this X1 at 4.0, they're not using enough signal retimers or whatever, so it's basically downgraded to PCI Gen 3. So they took a Gen 4 lane, and they're only driving it up to Gen 3 speed. So that's cost cutting, but at least it's there. And then 1 lane is Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi takes 1 lane. and then 2.5 takes another lane. Now, these only need one lane of Gen 3. So, most likely, these are also driven at Gen 3 speeds instead of the maximum Gen 4 that the chipset actually supports. So, there's 4, 5, 6, 7. So, there's literally one lane. There's one lane that's left hanging, unused. So, there's one lane unused. The last PCIe, the 8th lane, is empty. It's physically not connected to anything. So, but that's it. So this is not a great motherboard because this to me is a fail. Like, you're shortchanging the end user. You're not giving them, like, they could have given them another X1. You know, like, really? Okay. So it's just, yeah. Would I buy this motherboard? No. The price of this motherboard should be, you know, no more than like $150 max, I would say. Like, this should be a cheap motherboard because it's not offering like all, it's basically like cost cutting galore. They down regulate a Gen 4 lane to Gen 3. There is one lane that's actually not even used, so it's wasted resources. So, yeah, not a very good motherboard. That's basically it. So, yeah, that's, okay. Anyway, hope that answers the question. So, anyway, for those that are tuning in, who are probably going to watch this, like, either after it's live, this is the MSI Pro B650 S Wi-Fi. So definitely not one of the best. So that tier list video that I did when these motherboards were relatively new, like this would be in that lower ranking for sure. Unless it was really, really cheap. But the thing is, you can still find like a $150 motherboard that uses all the lanes. It might not give you any Gen 5, but at least it doesn't do this. This is a no-no. Like, we don't do this. Like, if you're building a motherboard, you don't do this. Like, what? Really? So, anyway. Can I look at the X670 Aorus Pro X? Okay. X670 Pro X. This is a white motherboard? The Aorus Pro X, X670E. Okay, the first thing I see, this actually looks a lot like the Aorus, what am I thinking of? The B650, or the X, this looks a lot like the X670 Aorus Elite, except this one has the E, which means this one has the full 24 Gen 5 lanes. So this is an upgrade to that motherboard. So it's standard ATX. There's no postcode debug. I don't like that. Which means this motherboard is probably a $300 motherboard if I had to guess. Anywhere from like $279 to $329 if I had to guess the price point without looking at it. I'm assuming that that's the price of this motherboard. So, full Gen 5, PCIe 3.0 X4, PCIe 3.0 X2. It's really PCIe 3.0. That's interesting, not PCIe 4.0. So they give you 2 M.2 Gen 5, 2 M.2 Gen 4. So yeah, this one looks good. This one's not like unusing anything. Like everything's used, I can tell. So because I'm just looking at the count. So lane counts 16. That's 24. So all the CPU lanes are used. And then for the Gen 4, there's a total of 12. So you have 8 of them. And then I'm guessing the 4 of them are this, but they're down regulated. And then you've got 8 Gen 3. So there's 2. And then 4 are going to be on SATA. So that's 6. So there's 2 more. 1 for Wi-Fi and 1 for LAN. So everything is used. And we can even verify that without drawing it. Because Gigabyte is actually very good in that they provide the motherboard block diagram in the manual. And sure enough, I was right. Everything is used properly. So you get 2 Gen 5 drives, full X16 PCIe 5, and then you have the 3rd M.2, which is Gen 4, the 4th M.2, which is also Gen 4, and then what they're doing is, so you got this X4 could have been Gen 4, but they're cost cutting. There is some cost cutting with this Gigabyte board. What they're doing is at the very bottom on the second chipset, instead of giving you Gen 4 X4, like the Aorus Master, for example, or the Aorus Elite AX, that's another one that does that, they're down regulating it to Gen 3. So it's cheaper in terms of the signal quality. So it's only certified for Gen 3. Because the Gen 3, there's only 4 lanes. And I'm counting 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I'm counting 8 Gen 3. That means 4 of those lanes are supposed to be Gen 4 lanes, but they're cost cutting, so they're only running them at Gen 3 speed. Because the Gen 3 lanes are actually going to SATA on this guy. And they're also going to the WAN or the Wi-Fi and the LAN and this X2. So if we compare to the Aorus Elite, where's the Aorus Elite? X670 Aorus Elite. So this one is not an E. So this is a non-E, which means it only has 4 lanes of Gen 5. So look at this. See, there's a difference here. See the difference? It looks complicated, but it's actually not that complicated. So Gen 5 is an M.2 drive. Gen 4 is the graphics card and another M.2 drive. That's a CPU. Then we have the chipset. Down here, it's different because look, they're doing 4 lanes Gen 4 for this chipset, 4 lanes Gen 3 for SATA drives. Then down here, they're doing 4.0 X4 for an M.2, 4.0 for the 4, that's the full 8 lanes. So I don't know why they say X3. Wait, why is it 3? Only for the Elite PCB revision 1.3 or later. Oh, okay. Oh, okay, I see. I see. So what Gigabyte is doing, they're doing the classic PlayStation thing. And what I mean by that is, do you guys remember when PlayStation launches, the first console, the first edition of the console is always the best edition. Maybe not from a power consumption standpoint, but from the feature standpoint, the first PlayStation, like for example, PlayStation 3, the first PS3 was the best PS3. Then there was the PS3 that only had like half of a PS2. Then there was the PS3 that had no PS2 inside. Then there was the PS3 Slim. Then there was the PS3 other, like the worst Slim. Then there was the PS3 Ghetto Slim. So it's like every single time they revise the PlayStation 3, it gets worse and worse and worse. So it's kind of like that with Gigabyte here, at least with this motherboard. Because if you have a revision 1.0, 1.1, or 1.2, you have a PCI Gen 4 X4 slot. But if you have the latest and greatest Aorus Elite AX with 1.3, you only have a Gen 3 X4, which is very similar to the Aorus Pro X. The Aorus Pro X only has an X4 Gen 3, which means that it's newer, but it's not necessarily better from a functional standpoint. So it's kind of like, oh man, this is like a PS3 Slim. This is a PS3 Slim. Whereas the older version of this was like a standard PS3. And then the newer ones of these, like if we click on it, I bet it's going to look different. Okay, it doesn't actually look different. But you know what? The 1.1 does look different. The 1.1 Aorus Elite is the really rare Aorus Elite. This one has a different design on the heatsink. And this one actually has a thick, with a C, heatsink for the Gen 5. Whereas these other ones have these clown heatsinks for Gen 5, which are completely inadequate for a Gen 5 SSD. So anyway, that's what I mean by like the PS. It's like they're doing the PS triple thing, where it's like with each edition, it's actually getting more and more ghetto. So yeah, I don't know, man. This is a nice looking motherboard, but it's definitely a cost reduced version of what used to be the Aorus Elite, as far as I'm concerned. It looks a lot like an Aorus Elite. I mean, it looks nice, but functionally, it's not quite as good. But really, the only thing that you're losing is the Gen 4 X4. I mean, it still has the physical X4. It's just Gen 3 instead of Gen 4. So, I mean, that's it. I mean, that's overall, though, this is definitely better than the MSI board that we looked at. And the one nice thing that I will say about this board is there's nothing shared. All the lanes are used. All the chipset resources are used, and there's no worry of sharing resources. Meaning, you're never going to cut your graphics card bandwidth in half because it's not shared with a PLX chip or with a switch for the M.2 or any of that stuff. So there's none of that, those sort of shenanigans. It's all pretty straightforward. So in that regard, this is a pretty decent motherboard. The only thing I don't like about it is no postcode debug. Like, that's the one thing it doesn't have. I can live with the Gen 3 X4, but the postcode, no postcode is like, yeah, no, I can't do that. This one was downgraded in the revisions. Yeah, yeah. You're still baffled after all these years that the B350 has 2 old PCIe slots. Oh, yeah. Because they still had those things. It's because there were still peripherals like sound cards or stuff that was still manufactured in 2017 that used PCI. That's why. Overall, this one's okay. I tend to think that this one's better, though. B650E Aorus Pro X USB4. I think this is a better board. It has the postcode debug. However, it does have shared resources. So the nice thing about the X series, and I don't mean Xbox, I'm talking about the chipset. The motherboards don't have sharing of resources. So notice how like everything has full bandwidth. Whereas you go to this Aorus Pro X, but it's B650E, it has the postcode. I really like that. But then we start looking at what's in here, and it's like, oh, it's got a switch. Oh, as soon as I use one of these M.2s, my graphics card runs at X8. Oh, there's a switch down here. If I want my 4th M.2, I can't use a capture card in the PC. And it's like, oh, so there's a lot of compromises that you have to make with B650 and B650E, which is why I think for a lot of people it's not a big deal. But for certain use cases, this is going to have to make you rethink how you do things. So that's the reason why understanding the motherboard that you're purchasing is very important going forward into the future, because like I say, the motherboard determines the choice of motherboard is actually very important. It's arguably more important compared to which AIB graphics card you decide to go with. Like, if you're looking at a graphics card, it's like, oh, are you gonna get like a Zotac? If we're talking NVIDIA, is it gonna be a Zotac, or is it gonna be MSI, or is it gonna be Asus? Meanwhile, if we're talking AMD, are we gonna go Sapphire or XFX? Or Power Color. It's the choice between those is nowhere near as significant compared to the motherboard, because if you choose the wrong motherboard and you learn the hard lesson of, oh, I can't connect this thing because if I do, I can't use this M.2 slot or whatever, then there's a problem. Then we have a problem. So, but there's always workarounds. So the thing with the B650E, even though there's a lot of sharing of resources, there's workarounds. So what do I mean by that? It's like, oh, if I must use 4 M.2 drives, I can do 1, 2, 3, 4, and I can live with my graphics card running at X8. It's gonna be worst case scenario, like Horizon Zero Dawn is gonna be like 3 to 4% worse performance running at X8. But that's like the worst case scenario. So, but the problem is like, oh, what if you want to play PlayStation 5 tethered to your PC via a capture card? It's like, oh, you can't use an AverMedia Live Gamer because as soon as you plug that in, it shuts off your 4th M.2 because the slot has priority over the drive. So, see, I can see a scenario where somebody who's inexperienced building PCs, let's say they install their boot drive with Windows into this M.2. And then they get the brilliant idea that they want to become a Twitch live streamer, streaming League of Legends or Fortnite. But they have Windows installed on this M.2 slot. So what do? Oh, but they want to also stream like either dual PC or capture Xbox Series X or PlayStation 5, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, or like Tekken 6 tournament scene, which is actually on the console, not the PC. So it's like they still got to tether the PS5. So if they do that, they're like, oh, I got to go get a Live Gamer 4K and plug it in. So they go and get one of those, they plug it into this slot, and then, oh, they turn on the computer, and guess what? They can't get into Windows. It's not booting anymore. What happened? Is the capture card defective? No. The answer is the switch prioritizes the PCIe slot. So the moment it detects something plugged into the slot, it will disable the M.2. So if the Windows boot drive is on this M.2 slot and something gets plugged into this, guess what? You're not getting into Windows anymore until you remove that card. Or move the boot drive to one of these. But these are the sort of pitfalls that a less experienced PC builder could run into. Like not knowing the ins and outs of what the motherboard is capable of. Because there's nothing wrong with the hardware. It's like they just didn't know that the switch automatically disables that M.2 if something gets plugged into this PCIe slot. Like, who's gonna know that? Like, how many people actually know that, So the workaround would be to without moving that drive, the workaround would have been don't buy an internal capture card, buy an external Thunderbolt capture card or USB-C capture card and plug it into the ASM4242, taking advantage of that 40 gigabit USB-C port on the back of the motherboard and capture PS5 gameplay that way. See, so that's the workaround. So it's not like you can't work around the issue or the limitations of the platform of B650E. You just have to know like what is the right hardware for the job. Anyway, so overall, I still like this motherboard, even though it has a lot of sharing. I think the only negative thing is I'm okay with the GPU having to be shared lanes because they at least use all of the lanes. Like, it would be annoying if there was one M.2 here and then the GPU runs at X8 when this M.2 is in use, but then there's literally 4 lanes that are being unused. So at least Gigabyte still used all the lanes. So that's okay. And then the only negative thing is the situation that I described, where this and this, there's a conflict here. But USB4 can save the day. So I don't know. I guess the counter argument would be, well, if you really need this X4 and you really need 4 M.2 drives, don't buy this motherboard. Buy something else like an Aorus Elite or something that has no sharing. See? So, or an X670. That's the reason why the X chipset, I think, is going to be the productivity choice for a lot of different use cases. I think if you're just somebody that wants to build a gaming rig, you're never going to do anything with capturing footage from either another PC or a console, or you're never going to install any sort of NVMe expansion in another PCIe slot, then I think B650E and X870 going forward are going to be the optimal choices for a lot of people. But if you want all that extra connectivity, you're going to have to go for the X870E. Okay, so that pretty much sums up the motherboards. So there are going to be a bunch of new motherboards coming out at the end of next month. That means that in the next few weeks, we're probably going to start seeing motherboard announcements from the various brands. Now, I can't even remember which tab I wanted to look at here. Oh, MSI, speaking of the brands that make motherboards, MSI exclusive PBO enhanced mode offers 22% boost to AMD Ryzen 9000 CPUs, thermal limit features. I don't even know if this is a new thing, though. This looks like something that has existed on these motherboards since like almost 2 years ago. Because I remember when they introduced those thermal limit PBO numbers, like, for example, PBO running, but you, instead of 95C temperature target, you target 90C or 85C or 80C. Gigabyte has all of this. I'm assuming all of them have this. So I don't really know, like, how is this an MSI exclusive thing? To me, it's just MSI is just taking the initiative to market the feature better than the others, because like no one's talking about this, but I feel like this isn't really that new. But they're claiming 4 to 10% faster than stock on a 9950X when they turn PBO enhanced mode to performance. I think out of the box, the motherboards are automatically setting the 9950X to run in what's called the enhanced profile. Because when I was looking at my 9950X in hardware info earlier today, Hardware Info automatically labeled it as 9950X enhanced. Like the word enhanced was next to the name of the CPU. So I was sitting there thinking like, why is it calling this thing enhanced? Like what's making it say that it's enhanced? Is this like a BIOS thing? Like is there some kind of preset here? I mean, I didn't do anything. It's just stock. So I don't understand why it says enhanced. Unless there's these new presets. Kind of like how Intel's microcode introduced Intel Baseline, Intel Baseline Extreme, Intel Poor. Like they introduced all these different levels now that override a lot of what the motherboard tries to do in terms of higher voltages, higher current. I think these are not really AMD. I think these are more the motherboard manufacturers are doing this, so I don't know. I'm always a little bit kind of weary of when motherboard manufacturers announce these performance enhancement things in their BIOS, especially now with what we've seen happen with the Intel CPUs. You hate your PS5? You never used it? You think you're going to sell it on eBay? Well, we should know in a few weeks if the PS5 Pro is coming out. PS5 Pro should come out in November of this year. Just FYI. So if you're thinking of selling your PS5, you may want to consider doing it before November, because when the PS5 Pro comes out, I don't think the PS5 will be that in demand. That being said, I think the PS5 is a decent console. I think it's definitely a better uplift over PS4 than PS4 was over PS3. Alright, I got way too many tabs open with motherboards. I'm getting confused. There was some article that I wanted to talk about. Maybe it was Phoronix. Oh, Ryzen 9950X. So for those of you on Linux, apparently these CPUs are the best CPUs currently for Linux, according to Phoronix. And they're pretty thorough on their reviews for the Linux platform. So let me just skip to the conclusion. Actually, what we're going to do, I want to look at the conclusions for a lot of these reviews. So the conclusion, the geometric mean of all test results show the 9950X and, interestingly, the 9900X are the top two performing CPUs in Linux performance benchmarks. This is the composite score, so this is averaged across everything that they tested, which is very interesting because it shows that the 12-core, 24-thread 9900X outperforms the 7950X. But the 9950X has the widest lead over everything else by a significant margin, which is very interesting to see. And they said, in total, I ran nearly 400 benchmarks across all the CPUs. This sort of review takes an entire week to make. Trust me, I know. As someone who literally just made a review, it's not live yet, but I did the review for the 9700X. I know exactly what it's like running benchmarks across all these different platforms over and over again. 400 benchmarks. Oh man, I don't even want to know. Like, those are like 12-hour days right there for the whole work week. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if some of this bled over into the weekend. When taking the geometric mean of all the raw performance, the 9950X came out to being about 18% faster than the 7950X. The 9900X was 21.5% faster than the 7900X across this mix of workloads. The 9950X was 33% faster than the Core i9 14900K. See, this is the reason why everybody says, like, if you're on Linux, AMD is the best choice. Like, I hear that all the time. And because on Windows, you don't see this sort of gap. Like, typically, Intel and AMD are a lot closer on Windows, but man, on Linux, 33% faster than the Core i9 14900K overall, and even the 9900X was 18% faster than the 14900K. For those still on AM4, see, this is where I think, this is what I feel like the video reviews don't talk about. Like, for those on AM4, for those on a 5950X, the 9950X was 1.87x faster. That's almost 2x the 5950X. So these are great gains. So, see, this is why a lot of people are blaming Windows Scheduler. I don't know if, I mean, I'll investigate this myself now that I have the CPU, but all this talk about Windows Scheduler is, I don't know how much of that is to be believed, although these Linux results kind of reinforce that idea that it's a scheduling problem on Windows. So the core, I know that with emulation, even with Intel CPUs, especially like the big core, little core Intel CPUs, emulation can suffer because of the Windows Scheduler. And that's on an Intel CPU. That isn't even talking about AMD CPUs. So, yeah, in certain scenarios, maybe it's a scheduling problem, but I don't think it's always a scheduling problem. So with the Intel Core benchmarks, it's worth mentioning that the testing was prior to the newly released microcode, and that there'll be more benchmarks that change soon. As of writing, the 14900K is retailing for around $550, while the 9950X is set to retail around 18% more, but delivering 33% greater performance. So, see, that's the thing. Like, on Linux, it's a no-brainer. You would go with the AMD over the older AMD and the Intel, because against Intel, it's 33% faster, and the Intel uses more power. Whereas against the older AMD, it's, what, 18% faster? But, so yeah, that's where it's kind of harder to justify. Like, it's 18%, but it's also more than 18% more money, so I don't know. That's where it's a little bit harder. So that goes back to this theme of AMD seems to be competing with themselves to a degree in terms of, like, AMD is their worst enemy right now, because Intel's in a weird situation where they put the microcode out there. The results are kind of mixed. A lot of people are seeing performance regressions. They're not that bad, though, but they are seeing regressions. And they're trying to claw back the regressions by doing things like undervolting, but the undervolts aren't guaranteed because it's not the same as curve optimizer. So it's kind of a mixed bag right now. Meanwhile, the Zen 4 CPUs they have such good deals in terms of pricing right now that in itself is another challenge for AMD when they're trying to sell these new Zen 5 parts. So, yeah, kind of a really weird situation for these CPUs right now. And then on top of it, there's like no new motherboards. So it's like, yeah, the incentive to buy Zen 5 right now is really, really low. Unless you're on Linux. The 9900X, meanwhile, at $500 is $50 less than the i9, while overall delivering 18% better performance. Yeah, that is interesting. What's very interesting is it sounds like the 12 core is actually very good value if you're on Linux. And then power consumption. Yeah, the 12 cores power band is similar to an i5. That's interesting. Okay, time code, compilation test. So more is better. So yeah, what I remember on Linux. So now I'm starting to remember. I remember on Linux the 7950X was always kind of leading the i9 by a small amount, and that shows here. And then the X3D Ryzen 9 flagship was basically the same as a 14900K, and that's shown here. But this new Zen 5 is like way out in front of all of them, which is nice to see. Yeah, see again, in creator workloads, it's way up there. Yeah, so it looks like they have the 9700X. What's really weird is even the 90s. Oh, this is cryptography. AMD is always the best at cryptography. Like, look, the Ryzen 7 9700X is almost as good as an i9 14900K. That's literally a CPU that has like half the threads, which is almost as good. That gives you an idea of how good AMD processors are at cryptography. And this is the reason why people who do CPU mining for cryptocurrency, they always go with Ryzen processors because of the cryptography performance. So what is this? That's the geometric OpenSSL, Gcrypt. So this is all the crypto stuff. And then we got the HPC. Wow, even as HPC, high performance computing, they're like the best ones too. Whoa, okay, I did not know AMD was that good in HPC on Linux. Like, wait, what? Even the 65 watt Ryzen 7 7700X is outperforming a 1400K? Wow. Okay. What is this? AVX 512. Okay, AVX 512. So the Intel one's gonna fall back. And yeah, all these Zen. Wow, like all the Zen 5 parts are at the top, except the Ryzen 5, which is behind the 7950X. So we're talking 6-core 12-thread is right behind a 16-core 32-thread. But an 8-core 16-thread is in front of a 16-core 32-thread. This is the kind of stuff that... Yeah, this is very interesting to see. Because, see, this is the sort of stuff... Can you imagine if these were the results on Windows? Can you imagine how the video reviewers, what they would have said if this was the performance on Windows for Zen 5? But yeah, man, the Linux performance is like really, really good. What we're talking like a 9700X beats a 7950X in AVX 512. Like, what? Renders. It seems like, yeah, okay, Linux is just, AMD, Ryzen plus Linux is just like insane. Encoding. Interesting stuff. So what do they say here? If you're currently on a Ryzen 9 7000 series platform, it may be hard justifying the upgrade to the 9900 series unless you are engaging AVX 512, heavy workloads, doing very frequent code compiles, creator tasks, or care a great deal about energy efficiency. But if you're still on AM4, or an existing Intel platform as a creator, developer, or someone frequently compiling code like Arch Linux, Gentoo, etc., and other multi-threaded tasks under Linux, the 9900 series is wonderful. Beyond desktop use cases, these benchmarks show versatility of the Ryzen 9 series across many diverse workloads and the potential of the 9900X and the 950X in Ryzen for servers and making great SOHO servers and other budget-friendly server-type deployments. Yeah, so this is the sort of stuff that, to me, this just says that the EPYC version of these CPUs is going to sell really well in data center environments. So, very, very interesting. The only main reason to hold off on upgrading would be if your workloads could benefit from 3D V-cache and being curious about the potential and pricing for presumed Ryzen 9000 series X3D variants, and or wanting to see how Intel Arrow Lake will play in the months ahead. So, yeah. So, they're going to do memory speed testing on DDR5. I'm going to do the same thing, but yeah, this is kind of the reviews that I think a lot of people were expecting, or these results are what a lot of people were expecting to see. And unfortunately, you only really see that on Linux. On Windows, I don't know what's going on. I'm going to test mine without the new chipset driver. We're going to do all the tests without updating the chipset driver and see how it performs. Somebody earlier on in the stream said that Harbor Unboxed showed the before and after. I'm still going to do my own tests without the new chipset driver and see what I get and see how it performs. We're going to look at stock performance first. Then I'm going to start looking at probably DDR8000. Then we're probably going to look at 4 sticks of DDR5. We'll probably do... I'm definitely going to do 192 gigs. We may look at 128 and see if we can get like 128.56. I can't do 128.64 or 6000 because I don't have a kit that is spec'd for that. But either way, I'm going to be doing a lot of tests with memory in the next several weeks leading up to those new motherboards. So... do you think it is a chance for both CCD? There is a chance for both CCDs to have V-cache. So, I've seen a lot of people asking that question. I don't know if AMD is going to do that. So, the reason why I don't know if they're going to do that is because it's not as easy as people think, first of all. Like, you got to remember, when a thread is using cache, having to access the data in that cache has an amount of latency associated with it. So if you have 2 CCDs with 3D cache and you have data in the cache on CCD2 and you have a core that Windows scheduler says to that core, I need you to use the data from the cache in CCD2. That means that the latency of that core... Okay, maybe I should just draw it out because it's going to be harder to explain this way. It'll be easier this way. Okay, let's get rid of this. Okay, so if I've got, this is the I/O die, this is CCD1, this is CCD2. Okay, wait, why is that one a little bit larger? There we go. Okay, so if I have data that resides on this cache, or this CCD cache, and I need, so this is core 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So if I have this core, but it needs to go get the data from here. It needs to get that. That means it has to go through the fabric and then go over here and then get this, and then it has to come back through the fabric and then to the core. That round trip time is the latency. So when you have one X3D, so let's say this one is X3D. The one in blue has X3D. The one over here, it has no X3D. So, whoops. Okay. Let's say this one's X3D. So if I need, going back to the original example, if I'm core 1 and I need to go and get data on this CCD in this cache, on the 3D cache, the latency is going to be like this. And then the round trip, basically, it's your transmit and then back around receive. See? So that's the latency. If the data is local in this cache, it's very fast. Why? Because I don't have to go through the fabric. I just access it directly. So the latency is very short. It's very low latency. Now the idea behind, so let's say this is a 7950 X3D. I don't know why it's in red, but there. Okay, so this is a 7950 X3D. This is the CPU. Okay. The way this is designed is there in the chipset drivers for Windows, there is a provisioning driver which basically tells Windows, it's very simple. It tells Windows, if Dragon's Dogma is open, or no, not open, is in window focus, or is in focused window. Okay, basically, let's make this more generic. If game is in focused window, park CCD 1 or 2, whatever. CCD 1, CCD 0, we'll just say CCD, we'll just say CCD 2, whatever, okay? Park one of them. Just park one of them. Park the cores in this. But there's a condition here. And utilization is less than equal to, like, I think the threshold's like 80% or something. If game is in focus window and utilization less than equal 80%, like total utilization is less than equal to 80%, park CCD 2. Else, no park. No, don't park anything. Okay? So that means if the game is running and the user has that game window as the active window, not the minimized window, not the background window, it'll park the CCD 2. It will basically make all the cores in the first CCD, aka the X3 CCD, active. What is the benefit of doing this? Well, it basically means that all the data will reside in this CCD. So it's like I need some orange. It's like if Bob Ross was doing the painting, it's like, okay, now we got all the paint in this CCD. So everything I need is going to end up over here. All the things, all the data is in this CCD. So basically, park this guy. Don't use this. So all the cores will be active. This will be active, 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 active. All of these, all 8 of these will be active, which means they're all going to be like, oh, they're all going to be transferring, pulling the data, loading, pulling in and out of the cache. It's all local. It's a big 3D cache. So they got lots of cache, and you get low latency. That's the idea behind parking the core when the game is in focus. As soon as you click away from the game, maybe this is a good video that I should do, actually. Although I already did a video about this when that CPU was new. I'm wondering if I should do a video about this, because I don't think a lot of people understand the behavior of the dual CCD X3D CPUs. See, the reason why I know how they work is because I use one all the time. So I know the ins and outs of how it behaves. I know that the second I click away from the game, even if the game is running in borderless full screen mode, as soon as I click over onto my other monitor and make the browser active, guess what? The second CCD wakes up. Everything gets unparked. So the game and stuff can move to the other CCD if they need, if the Windows scheduler does it. Nothing's stopping it from doing that. So that's the reasoning behind it. However, when you wake up the cores, I would think that when these cores wake up, there is a little bit of a lag time in when they wake up. Now, it's probably very, very small, but what I would like to see is the amount of latency, or the amount of time, which is going to be in nanoseconds, so it's basically going to show up as a latency, that it takes to wake up a core from being parked. I don't imagine it's that much, but I would think that if there's a problem with the Windows scheduler, it is incorrectly waking up cores when it doesn't need to, due to some sort of prioritization, which means the second condition is probably set too loose, too not strict enough, or something like that. And that's probably what is causing the, I guess, quote unquote issues that people are seeing with how the provisioning driver from AMD is functioning with the Windows scheduler. So that's my theory. I don't plan on installing that driver, so we'll see what my results look like without it. But I guess you guys said that Hardware Unboxed tested with both, so I'd probably need to go watch their video now, because I have not watched their video at all. So, okay. Anyway, that is the idea behind the core parking. Core parking is not a bad thing. So I think core parking is misunderstood. I don't think a lot of people actually understand core parking. A lot of people think core parking is something that, like, first of all, does anybody know where core parking came from? I don't think people even know where it's from. I think it's a Windows thing, actually. Trying to find that old article. I can't find it right now. No, wrong. It's been around forever. Core parking has existed for a very long time. Like more than 10 years. I'm trying to remember when, like, okay, first of all, I guess we do need to talk. Maybe I should make a video about that, because I honestly think that like 90% of the tech community has no idea what core parking actually is. So, because it is not from Intel and it is not from AMD. That's like number one. It is, if anything, it came from Microsoft Windows. Although I wouldn't be surprised if Linux features core parking as well. So, I guess the fundamentals on core parking. Core parking is a power savings tool / feature. It is a power savings feature. It has nothing to do with how AMD or Intel designed their CPUs. It is a power savings tool, an ability that the operating system can use to cut power consumption. That is what it is. It is designed for power savings. It was never intended for game performance. It was never designed for that use case. So AMD coming out with this provisioning driver for their dual CCD X3D, that is kind of a clever take on how to take a operating system level feature and try to use it with their essentially a multi CPU design, because this is something that you can do on a server if you want to cut the power consumption significantly. Because think about a server. So a server typically looks like, okay, you got a long, if we're looking at it from above, looking down on to the top of the server, what you will see is there will be multiple sockets. So you got one CPU socket here, and you have another one over here, and then you have a whole bunch of DIMM slots. You typically have like 8 or 12, probably 12 or more DIMM slots per socket. So we're talking 24 DDR5 DIMMs minimum in a single server. On top of that, then you're going to have your compute, so or your like GPUs might be in the back here. So you might have a GPU here, you have another GPU there, another GPU here. It starts to look like a crypto mining machine, but it's not, because it's meant for AI training. So core parking is designed so that if I have 256 cores, and if I'm not needing to use all those cores, I can turn off the cores in the operating system without having to go into the BIOS and manually shut them off, because that would mean that I have to reboot the server, and you can't do that if you're running a game server, because you got people raiding in World of Warcraft, and you gotta have the CPU running 24/7 because they're logging in to play World of Warcraft, The War Within. So, or any whatever game it is. So that's the reason why core parking exists. It exists as a power saving feature. Now, AMD, in all their infinite wisdom, thought it was clever to take a power saving feature and try to figure out, hey, we can actually use core parking to improve the gaming performance of a dual CCD, because we can basically put the other CCD to sleep so that the Microsoft Windows will force all the game activity to one CCD, mimicking a single CCD system while playing a game. That is exactly how a 7950 X3D behaves. As somebody who uses a 7950 X3D, I can speak with authority on this subject. People who do not actually have that CPU can't say anything because they don't actually know the intricacies of how it behaves, because they don't use it every day. So, but anyway, core parking has been around for at least 15 or more years. It is not new. Intel did not invent it. AMD had nothing to do with it in the beginning. So, but they thought, hey, we can actually use a power saving ability to get better gaming performance. So kind of an interesting take on that functionality. And for those that don't know, Intel uses core parking all the time. My 13900K almost always puts the E-cores into parked mode on a regular basis. So I just wanted to point that out too, because if people think that core parking is something that like the chipset driver has to enable, no, it's a operating system function, and Windows will determine based off of the load and the activity when to put cores to sleep. It is a natural function of Windows, taking advantage of a power savings feature. So if you guys don't believe me, go watch the video that I did back when X3D was new, where I show how a 13900K does core parking, because it does it all the time. It's not an AMD thing. So it's amazing to me how nobody knew what core parking was until X3D came out. And then as soon as X3D came out, it's like all these normies that just play games start spouting a bunch of misinformation and not understanding about where the technology actually came from. It's hilarious. At the same time, it's rather annoying to listen to all the misinformation. Anyway, how significant do you think the performance improvement of AMD 950X3D will be compared to 750X3D? So, I don't know if I fully answered the question earlier about the dual CCD having 3D V-cache on both. So, my assumption is that the 9950X3D will be a single 3D V-cache CCD accompanied by a standard non-3D V-cache. Now, unless AMD can figure out a better implementation, I don't think they're going to do dual X3D on a CPU. I could be wrong. Maybe they will do it. I think that because you have additional cache, because when you have two CCD 3D stacks, now if you have cache on one CCD and that data is on the 3D cache of CCD2, and you have a core in CCD1 needing to access data in CCD2, the amount of latency will be higher than if you only had one X3D CCD, if that makes sense, because you have way more cache. So now the chance of having to traverse the fabric and then go through more cache, because it's a 3D cache, I think you're actually going to have worse latency on a dual X3D CPU versus a dual CCD CPU that only has one X3D stack. So unless there's some improvements that they make with with how they access the cache, I don't know. Like, I don't think they're going to do a dual CCD X3D because I don't think it's that simple. I think there's a lot of things with the branch prediction, and maybe the branch prediction improvements that they did will play a key factor in that. I don't know, but I don't think I wouldn't be. Let's put it this way: I would be surprised if AMD launches a 9950X3D that has 3D V-cache on both CCDs. I would not be surprised if 9950X3D is basically like a 7950X3D, only with Zen 5. Because that's easier to implement. From a scheduling standpoint, that's much easier to implement. So how significant do you think the performance improvement of the AMD 9950X3D will be compared to the 7950X3D? Oh, the last thing I'm going to say about core parking. I want to say one more thing about core parking. It's clear to me when I listen to people who talk about like core parking, it's clear to me if they actually have a background in data center or not, because of how they talk about core parking. Like, if someone talks about core parking as a video game enhancing feature, then that's clear to me that they're kind of a normie person who doesn't actually know what they're talking about. Versus if someone actually explains it as a power savings feature, then I can immediately tell. See, that's the sort of thing, like if you're interviewing, if you're a hiring manager and you're interviewing somebody for a job, you can tell if if it's just BS. You know, like if you ask somebody, like if I was interviewing somebody for a job and the question I asked them is, can you explain core parking? Explain core parking to me. Based off of what they tell me, I can tell if they actually understand what it is or if they have no idea what they're talking about. So that's a perfect interview question for someone who's trying to get a job in like system database administration on a a tier 2, tier 3 level, support level, or those sort of things. Anyway, how significant do you think? Okay, we already answered that. Yeah, I think it will be better, but I don't know what. So I don't know what the full benefits of the branch prediction improvements that AMD made, how those advancements, those improvements will play out with the X3D CPUs. Meaning, the improvements they made to the branch prediction could have a much greater benefit the more cache you have versus if it doesn't have that much cache, if that makes sense. So there is potential for a pretty decent uplift with the X3D variants. But I have no idea when they're coming out. For some reason, this is another thing that I'm not sure where these rumors are coming from. Like, people are saying that X3D is coming out next month. I don't know who started spreading those rumors. I just think that's a bunch of misinformation, because if the motherboards aren't even out until the end of next month, why would the X3D CPUs come out next month? You see what I'm saying? Like, what? So I wouldn't be surprised if we don't see X3D until the end of the year at the earliest. So I could see maybe November. But realistically, it's definitely not going to be Q3, which is literally this month and next month. If X3D comes out, it would have to be November or December. Otherwise, I think it's probably going to be like February is when we see them. So anyone who's waiting on X3D 9000 series, like, you're probably, I don't want to be that guy, but realistically, I don't see any reason why those CPUs would come out this year. I'm not saying they won't, because I have no idea. But to think that they would come out next month, because I've heard a lot of people say that. I've heard reviewers. I've heard certain reviewers, not going to say any names, but I have seen certain reviewers on YouTube saying that X3D is coming out in September. Like, I don't know where they're getting that info. Like, is that actually a thing? Because, like, that is news to me if that is actually true. But anyway, I would say November at the earliest, which is still a ways off. But anyway, that is probably going to be it. I think we covered most of what I wanted to say. Let me see what I have in this. Yeah, we did all the motherboard stuff. Did we look at Tech Power-Ups review? I don't think we did. Oh yeah, Tech Power-Up. Hey man, thanks for the sub. Let's just look at the conclusion here. Conclusion for the 9950X. So, says it's the fastest CPU in applications that we have ever tested. Impressive single thread performance. AMD's fastest Zen 5 gaming processor. Good energy efficiency. Runs on existing socket. Overclocking unlocked. Integrated GPU. Full AVX 512. No risk of E-cores complicating software compatibility. ECC support. Okay, the negatives. High price. Only small gains versus previous generation. Yeah, that seems to be the general trend for Windows for some reason, and I need to look into that. Slower than the X3D in gaming. This part, I don't know if that's true. I need to really look into, like, why people are saying Xbox Game Bar. Like, this is only to utilize a power savings feature on the dual X3D to kind of trick Windows into, like, I don't get that. High idle power requires, that's because it's the dual CCD, requires good cooling. No way to relax the 95. Yeah, actually, no, there are BIOS limits. There's BIOS settings, but I don't know if that's even necessary, though, unless you're using PBO, to be honest, because it doesn't actually go to 95 at stock. No NPU for AI acceleration. Yeah, whatever, because why would you do that on a desktop when your GPU would just do it anyway? So, yeah. Let me see what they said for the percentages, though. let me just see here. So averaged over 49 tests. The 9950X sets a new overall performance record. It achieves 3.4% uplift over the 750X, which is much less than expected. Still, at the end of the day, it is the fastest desktop CPU in the world. While for the average Joe, the difference is small, it can be substantial when looking at demanding apps like rendering. Yeah, I noticed that. Like, my R23 score is like over 42,000 at stock. And that's literally with JEDEC memory. And Fabric isn't even set correctly either on that. For example, V-Ray rendering, our best case, ran 19% faster than the 750X. If you're making money with rendering, this investment could pay off quickly. We also saw good double-digit gains for NoSQL databases and AI workloads. Yeah, everything I'm hearing, especially with like Linux support and stuff, a lot of people are saying like AI this, AI that, like it's so good at AI. That's all probably because of AVX 512, if I had to guess, and the new branch predictor. On the other hand, there's also several performance regressions. For example, Keyshot runs 18% slower, and virtualization. So I'm wondering if this is because of the dual, like the provisioning driver that they installed. These are the sort of things that I really want to check, because if the cores are getting parked when they're not supposed to, that is how you could see 18% slower performance. And also like virtualization performance, because that should not be down. If all this other stuff is up, you can't have like regression in virtualization. Like that doesn't make any sense. So I don't know what's going on there. Despite improved efficiency, the 9950X will hit its power limit in demanding workloads. Okay, yeah, we removed the power limit and enabled PBO auto. And we saw decent performance improvements, but I wouldn't say these. So this is something that I won't actually do with this CPU. The only reason why I did this with the 9700X is because that CPU runs at 65 watt TDP versus the 7700X, which runs at 105 watt TDP. So that's the reason why I turned PBO on, so that it would up the power limit. Now, because this one has a 170 watt, it's identical to the 750X, there's no reason to turn PBO on if you want to get an apples-to-apples comparison. And they say AMD's TDP choice of 170 watts is very reasonable. It's easy to cool. Strong competition comes from the 1400K, which is only a few percentage points slower at lower pricing. Still, the performance crown goes to AMD. Last generation 750X 3D compromises a bit in application performance because the CCD of the 3D V-cache can't clock as high, but it makes up for that with higher gaming performance. Yeah. So I would say this, kind of my initial thoughts on like comparing, for example, a 7950X 3D to the new 9950X. I feel like the reason why you would want the newer CPU over a 7950X 3D is if you wanted to play around with Curve Shaper, if you wanted to actually do some pretty decent overclocking, because you can't really overclock an X3D, realistically speaking, at least not in the traditional sense. So if you're definitely an enthusiast that likes to play around with the full tool set that exists in terms of the overclocking ability, I think the 9950X is what I would get. However, if you're somebody who wants AMD likes to use the best of both worlds slogan for their 7950X 3D, I still think this CPU is a really good CPU. Like, I like this CPU a lot, but that's because I understand how it works. I think there's a lot of weird misunderstanding of how this CPU works. In gaming, this CPU is basically a 7800X 3D, plus or minus 2%. So it's so close, you'll never know the difference. And then the other thing is, if you're someone who games at like 4K resolution, you'll never see the difference. You'll never know the difference. But on top of that, you get the extra cores. So if you're someone who does anything productivity-wise, and one thing I'll say, the last thing I'll say about the 7950X3D against the regular 7800X3D is when I use the 7950X3D, shader compiling is a joke. It doesn't take that long on a 7950X3D. Meanwhile, on a 7800X3D, it takes a lot longer because it has half the thread count. So that is another thing, another advantage that the 7950X3D has over the standard 7800X3D. So if I could choose one over the other, I would go with the dual CCD, the 750X, any day over the standard one. However, obviously nothing's free, so there's a reason why that CPU costs more money. It's just better objectively speaking. So that's really the only, the 7950X3D is really the only Zen 4 CPU that I would even consider at this point. If I was thinking of building a new computer, if I was still on AM4, for example, the 7950X3D is one that I would consider. Otherwise, it's pretty much Zen 5 all the way at this point. Yeah, let me see what it says here. So gaming. Oh, wait, what did it say? So they said the new architecture is setting new standards in single-thread performance. For example, Zen 5 has broken records in MP3 encoding. The 7950X is 10% faster than the 6 GHz 14700 or 14900K, despite a 300 MHz clock deficit. Very impressive. AMD's IPC gains are truly remarkable. As mentioned before, AMD has implemented a full 512-bit data path for 512, which should help, especially in commercial applications. This is what I'm talking about, guys. For servers, this stuff is so optimized for servers. These little chiplets, these CCDs, are so optimized for commercial applications. These things are gonna sell big time in data center. For consumers, it's mostly irrelevant, though. Using AVX512 in our Stockfish chest test, the 9950X shows a decent 9% performance improvement, but it runs into the power limit quickly. When we remove the limit, it grew into a 17% gain, which is quite nice, but comes with serious power consumption of 320 watts for the CPU. These new AVX512 units do consume more power. Yeah, AVX has always been, advanced vector extensions has always been a power hog since they originally came out. And that's the reason why Intel abandoned AVX512. It was because of energy efficiency concerns. That's the reason why Intel doesn't feature that functionality on their consumer desktops. And that's why they disabled it for the 12th generation. Zen 4 Ryzen processors are formidable gaming machines. But see, that just goes to show the efficiency of the AMD parts, though. See, because a lot of people, you're hearing in the reviews, oh, it's the energy efficiency this, the energy efficiency that. Well, I mean, the fact that it can do 512 and not melt down is pretty impressive. So the X3D are formidable gaming machines. We already know, everybody already knows that. After the Computex announcement, AMD confirmed that the Zen 5 processors will not be able to beat the gaming performance of the 7800X3D. Our gaming tests show that AMD has definitely improved gaming performance over Zen 4. The 9950X beats all non-X3D AMD processors, and it's the fastest Zen 5 gaming CPU. The gaps are small, especially when comparing Zen 5. At 1080p, the gap between the 9950X and the 9600X is only 1%. As expected, the X3D processors are still faster. At 1080p, The 7800 X3D leads by 7.5. The 7950 X3D leads by 3%. Intel's 14900K also offers a bit more frames per second for $100 less with higher power draw. As we move up in resolution, the delta becomes smaller. So, okay, now let's talk about like GPU bottlenecks, and they're saying how the 4090 bottlenecks your CPU at like 4K and stuff. Yeah, okay, that's whatever. All right, just 2 days ago, AMD notified us that the... Okay, this is the weird, like, paragraph. Yeah, this is the weird part. You think there's something buggy with core parking? Well, I'll tell you right now, it's not a chipset. It's gonna be a Windows thing. It's a Windows scheduling / chipset driver interacting with Windows thing, or I guess Windows interacting with chipset driver. So, yeah, what does it say here? Okay, this is the thing that we're talking about. So the Windows, okay. AMD notified us that the Ryzen 9s have Windows game mode core parking optimizations installed by the AMD PPM. I'm not installing this. Just FYI, for my review with the 9950X, I am not installing this. I'm just saying that now. We're not installing this thing. I'm going to do all the benchmarks without this thing. I don't care what AMD says. We're testing without this. And that Windows game mode must be... No, we're not doing that. So I am going to compare to a 7950 X3D. However, the 7950 X3D will have this enabled. The 9950X will not have this enabled. Xbox Game Bar must be enabled to... Oh, no, it doesn't. No, it does not have to be. The legacy control power... No, they don't have to be. But it does need to be balanced. It does need to be balanced. Do not use high performance. That is wrong. That's wrong. That's just wrong for every CPU. All the Intel CPUs. It's just straight up wrong. Use balanced. That's all you need. Sometimes Windows does not apply the correct provisioning. Yeah. Oh, cool. You can say that again. It's Windows. You can try uninstalling and reinstalling the chipset driver. I don't even know how to... Oh, yeah. No. There's no reason to do that. There's a lot of hoops to jump to. No, we're just not installing this thing, man. Like this... No, we're not installing this. I'm just going to use mine out of the box as is. That's how it's going to be, and that's it. Integrated graphics. Okay, what is this? Oh, I completely forgot about the integrated graphics. It has integrated graphics. They tested it, even though it's not the main selling point. Performance for non-gaming tasks is good. You'll be able to run all the productivity, everything, media playback, just like a laptop. From a technical perspective, this is the same iGPU on the 7000 series because AMD is using the same I/O die. In gaming, the performance is identical to the 7000 series iGPU. AMD has always made it clear that the iGPU is not for serious gaming, yet it's still faster than what Intel sells in their Raptor Lake processors, and it works with all games, while the Intel iGPU failed in 3 out of 9 games. Okay. Wow, I'm surprised they actually devoted time to test that, because that's something that I'm not going to test. What? Like, okay, it's cool to know that it actually is that good. I mean, that's interesting. The 9950X uses a good deal less power than its predecessor. On average, it consumed 135 watts on productivity, whereas the 750X used 150 watts. In demanding workloads, this difference can grow to around 50 watts. Gaming power is a bit down. Not nearly as good as X3D. Compared to Intel, compared to 1400K, power usage is roughly 50 watts lower in both gaming and applications. While that's remarkable, it's probably not make or break because AMD CPU is more expensive. Yeah. Okay. I mean that makes sense. The 1400K has been out since October of last year, so that makes sense. Okay. Cooling requirements. So, they tested on the Noctua D15. I am going to also test on the Noctua D15. All the tests I do are always on air coolers. And that includes the Intel CPUs. The Intel CPUs will be graded based off of how they perform on a Noctua NHD15. If they can't perform, that's their problem. I mean, that's just too bad. That's just how it is. If someone should not have to use a liquid cooler. There are individuals that build PCs who will never allow water to come anywhere close to their PC. So that means regardless of whether they go AMD or Intel, they will use an air cooler. They don't care if the CPU is constantly thermal throttling. They're going to stick an air cooler on there. I wonder how many of those people had their Intel 14th gen CPUs die prematurely. Okay. The reason why I know this is because I made a video how to enable eco mode on a 13900K. And probably a good 1/3 to half of the comments on that video are from people who refuse to use AIOs on their Intel CPU. They're only going to use air coolers. So I keep thinking of what that sales guy told me today at Micro Center. He said what people think should be is so different from reality. It's like all the tech enthusiasts think that everyone knows how to upgrade their BIOS. Or they think that people know to put liquid cooling on an Intel i9. The reality is no one updates their BIOS and people use air coolers on Intel CPUs. like that's actually the reality. So, wow. Okay, the times we live in. During the press briefings, AMD mentioned a 15% 7C improvement in thermals due to optimized floor planning and better placement of the thermal. Okay, we already knew about this. Okay. Let's see. We've seen very long boot times from the bigger AM5 processors in the past. So the boot time thing depends on the amount of RAM. I want to say that because in my own testing, you guys know I've done a lot of DDR5 testing. Typically, the more RAM you have, the longer the initial training will take. So if you're someone who's only running 32 gigs of RAM, you'll never really notice the long boot times, besides the first time that it initializes, like when you first set up the system. But if someone's running 64 gigs, 96 gigs, 128, 192, etc., then you're going to see the long boot times. But this is more of a DDR5 behavior than an AMD behavior. Because I've tested on Intel, and if you try to run 128 gigs of DDR5 on Intel, it's just as bad in terms of how long it takes. So the fact is, like, not a lot of people do that. And most people on Intel are on DDR4. So that's why they don't see this behavior most of the time. Okay, however, so that's going to change, though, with Intel's next socket, because Intel is going all in on DDR5, and there won't be a DDR4 option for the new Intels. So, yeah, we'll see how they handle, because I was curious to see how AMD addresses DDR5 with the new Ryzen CPUs. However, from my own testing so far, I don't see any significant difference in terms of the initial DDR5 training. It's pretty much the same. And it makes sense because the I/O die is where the memory controller resides, and that is still functionally the same thing carried over from Zen 4. Okay, so here's an interesting thing that they point out. We experienced really good memory training times with the monolithic Phoenix, so the 8500G, which doesn't use a separate I/O die. Zen 5 only has small improvements. Okay. Yeah, the laptops, the Ryzen laptops don't take that long, despite being DDR5. But a lot of them are soldered RAM, though. So, I don't know. Yeah, that is something to look into, though. Because once you get it to train, it's not slow. It's fast, like normal. It's just that initial training. Like, why DDR5 takes longer to train than DDR4 is still a mystery to me. To this day, I still don't understand why DDR5 takes significantly longer to train compared to DDR4. But it does. It just does. It's a behavior of DDR5. Okay, yeah, because see, once that's complete, powering the machine on is very fast and only takes 12 seconds to the Windows startup screen, which is just as fast as on the other systems. So yeah, I don't know what it is about the first time DDR5 has to do with the initial training, but it's not really improved with Zen 5. AMD's announcing the 800 series chipset, but the motherboards aren't ready yet. Okay, we just talked about that. Overclocking. Okay. Yeah, we'll look at overclocking later, but that's cool. Alright, so highly recommended, but expensive. That's basically how it did. So it didn't score as high as the 9600X. I feel like Tech PowerUp gave the 9600X a pretty good score. What did they say about this one, though? The 12 core. Yeah, the problem with the 12 core is that it always runs into, oh, the last year Flagship is cheaper and da 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 da. So it's, yeah. They didn't even give it an award? Wait, what? Wow, this one didn't even get anything. What did they say? But that price. Okay, so they're basically saying that it's very high price. You can get a 32-thread 7950X for $20 more, or a 7900X for $140 less. Only small gains, slower than the X3D in gaming. Okay, so wow, this one actually scored the worst out of all of them. What's funny is this one scored the best. The cheapest one actually got the highest score on Tech PowerUp. They gave it an editor's choice. Yeah, they gave this one an editor's choice. So yeah, that's because at that price, and it being like only what, like 1% slower than the 16 core in gaming. Yeah, I feel like a lot of people like this. Either this or the 7800X3 would be like really good first time PC builder computers. I just feel like that would be good. What was the question? 2022 or 2023? What was the original question for that? But see, Carlton, the thing about the scheduling, like Zen 5 being highly selective, I don't think it's highly selective. I think it's Windows. And the thing is, all these guys who reviewed this, they did that thing that AMD told them to do. I'm not going to do what AMD told them to do. So we'll see if my results are any different, if they're even different at all. October for what? Oh, for the 14? It was last year. 14900K was October of 2023. 13900K was October of 2022. Yeah, we're pretty much at the end of the stream. Like, I don't really have anything else to discuss, but yeah. Anyway, guys, that's probably going to be it. I'm just going to keep doing my testing. I've done, like, the review for the 9700X is complete. So expect that one pretty soon here in the next couple of days. I just need to do, like, a final edit, and then it's pretty much ready to go. But yeah, we're going to start working on the 9950X content. And expect to see some 97... Well, we'll see. I need to do the 9950X test and then retest 13900K with a new Intel microcode. Then I need to test the 7950X again so that it has a fresh set of benchmarks. And then we'll start working on the review. But in the meantime, I'm also going to be doing like DDR5 content. For those that are curious, particularly 4 sticks of DDR5. Something appears not functioning properly on release. I don't think it's... So I think if you run the CPU stock and you don't do what AMD says to do, you're probably going to avoid any of those scheduling problems because it would just basically behave like a 7950X. So my experience so far is that, to me, it's no different from the 7950X in how it behaves at a fundamental level. So, but that's because I didn't change anything. I kept my old ancient chipset drivers. I'm not going to upgrade them. I'm just going to leave them the way they are and do all the tests and then go and look at how the data stacks up. And then I guess I'll cross-reference with some other reviewers to kind of see if I'm in the same ballpark as them. And then that's basically it. So far I haven't had any issues though, but I haven't done a lot of testing though. I've only tested the thing for like 1 hour. But yeah, we'll see. I'll have more to say on this subject next week. So if you're new to the channel and you like these sort of long form discussions where we answer questions live pertaining to building a PC and that sort of thing, feel free to get subscribed. We do these live streams are every Thursday at this time. Like, we're at the end of one now. But if you're new and you have questions about building a PC, I can address those questions live. That's actually the best time to ask the questions, is when I'm live, because then I can, do the whole paint thing and draw things, and then it could end up turning into its own clipped video if it's actually pretty good overall. If I feel like there's long-term value in that for a wider audience. But other than that, that is the Zen 5 non-X3D CPUs. So maybe we'll see X3D Zen 5 later this year. I don't know what the deal is with Intel. I know Intel's having an issue right now with financial problems. They're having delays. Their Intel Innovation got canceled or pushed back or something. I don't know what's going on with them right now. But they could potentially be very interesting to look at their Lunar Lake and their Arrow Lake later this year, assuming they're still slated for this year. But because they've had to devote a lot of time and effort to this microcode for 13 and 14 Raptor Lake, I don't know what's going on. But we will be looking at more CPU, motherboard, DDR5 related content over the next several weeks. So stay tuned for that. And then as we get closer to NVIDIA's 50 series graphics cards, we're going to start talking about GPUs again. But I feel like people were pretty burned out from GPUs from the 40 Super stuff at the beginning of this year. And then basically like too much GPU content from like Q2, and then Computex happened, and then, AMD announced Zen 5, and now it's pretty much been Zen 5 for the last month, talking about that. But PS5 Pro is coming, so we got plenty of content on the console side, on the VR side. I'll probably be testing VR on PC again, because the PS2 VR is amazing on PC. So I definitely want to do some sort of video series on VR, which will be interesting because I haven't actually done that before. But anyway, guys, that's going to be it for this live stream. If you're new, get subscribed. It does help us out in terms of visibility. And with that said, I'm going to get on out of here. And once again, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys next time. Thanks.